Orders of the day, ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour. Prise en considération à l'étape du rapport du projet de loi C14.
Bill C14. The Bail and Sentencing Reform Act.
It's on. We're told it's on.
Order. There are 9 motions and amendments standing on the notice paper for the report stage of Bill C14. La motion numéro 1 ne sera pas choisie.
Motion number 1 will not be chosen by the speakership.
Chair is satisfied that they meet the guidelines expressed in the note to Standing Order 76.15 regarding the selection of motions and amendment at the report stage. Motions number 2 to 9 will be grouped for debate and voted upon according to the voting pattern available at the table. Je vais maintenant soumettre les motions numéro.
I will now submit the motions 2 through 9 to the House.
2. Madame May, appuyée par Madame Idlaut, propose que le projet de loi.
Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 be amended by deleting Clause 43.
Motion number 3. Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 in Clause 58 be amended by replacing lines 32 and 33 on page 28 with the following. Quote, Criminal Code is enacted by sections 8, 9, 11, 37, and 40. Shall I dispense? Dispensed. Motion numéro 4. Madame May, appuyée par Madame Idlaut, propose que le...
Motion number 4, Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 be amended by deleting Clause 70.
Motion number 5. Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 be amended by deleting Clause 71. Motion number 6. Madame May, appuyée par Madame Idlaut, propose...
Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 be amended by deleting Clause 72.
Motion number 7. Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 be amended by deleting Clause 76. Motion numéro 8. Madame May.
Motion number 8. Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 be amended by deleting Clause 77.
Motion number 9. Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Idlaut, moves that Bill C14 in Clause 78 be amended by replacing line 26 on page 36 with the following. Quote, an act as enacted by sections 60 to 62, 68, 73. Debate. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the moment, all I would like to say in terms of debate is that I'm grateful to have it submitted, and I look forward to vote on them, but I'll be unable to participate in debate at the moment due to circumstances.
I think we lost the member's last few words from that. So, yes, the Honourable Member for Lanark Frontenac on a point of order.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Speaker, I genuinely don't know the answer to this. What is the practice with regard to an honourable member who's coming in virtually but is not visible to us, is merely heard from us? Is it in order for that person to participate in debate or not?
So the ruling is the person's face must be visible, the camera must be visible. The camera was on and was visible for the. It may not have popped up on the screen, and that would have just been. But they were visible within the. And she did have the proper headset as well to clarify as well, which is again very obviously very important for the for our friends in the interpretation booth. So we will go to resuming debate. The member is passed on her time. So the Honourable Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today at report stage to speak in strong support of Bill C14 and to urge members of this House to support the bill as it stands. This legislation is not abstract. It is grounded in what Canadians are experiencing in their communities. Over the past several years, we have heard consistent and clear calls for action from across this country. Premiers, mayors, police chiefs, prosecutors, and frontline workers have all told Parliament that repeat violent crime is having a real impact on public safety and on the confidence in our justice system. They have asked us to act responsibly, not recklessly, They have asked for solutions that are practical, focused, and capable of making a difference on the ground. Bill C-14 is the result of listening to those voices and responding in a serious way. This is a bill about balance, and it recognizes that public safety and fairness are not competing values, but complementary ones. Canadians want a justice system that protects their rights, and they also want a system that responds effectively when patterns of violence or serious criminal behavior emerges. Bill C-14 strengthens bail rules in targeted circumstances involving repeat violent offending. It clarifies when detention should be more strongly considered. It strengthens sentencing responses for serious crimes that undermine public safety and confidence in the system. And it does all of that while preserving judicial discretion and respect for the Charter. That, a careful balance, is one of the reasons this bill has received support from provincial and municipal partners. These are leaders who are responsible for keeping communities safe. They are the ones responding to calls from residents, supporting police services, and working with prosecutors and courts. Their message to us has been consistent. Targeted reform is needed, and it is needed now. At committee, members from all parties engaged seriously with the bill. Amendments were proposed and debated. Officials were present to provide expertise. Where changes improved the bill, they were adopted, Mr. Speaker. That process strengthened the legislation and ensured that it would work as intended. The bill before us at report stage reflects that collaboration and that work. Now, at this point in the legislative process, we face an important choice. We can move forward with a bill that has been carefully crafted, studied, and improved, or we can reopen and weaken key provisions that are central to its purpose. The report stage amendments before us would take us in the latter direction, Mr. Speaker. Some of these amendments would remove or dilute provisions designed to address repeat violent offending. Others would roll back sentencing and bail measures that partners across the country told us were necessary to restore confidence in the system. Still others would undo compromises reached after thoughtful discussion at committee. This is not what Canadians asked for. Canadians asked us to act. They asked us to strengthen public safety in a way that is responsible and durable. They asked us to do the hard work of governing, not to delay or dilute action at the final stage. Bill C-14 does not overreach. It does not replace judgment with ideology. It respects the role of judges and the independence of the courts, but it also recognizes that Parliament has a role to play in setting clear expectations where experience shows that clearer direction is needed. That is why this bill matters. It sends a clear message that repeat violent behavior will be taken seriously. It reinforces that court orders must be respected. It strengthens the tools available to address serious criminal conduct while preserving fairness and proportionality. Just as importantly, it demonstrates that governments can work collaboratively across jurisdictions and party lines to address complex issues. This bill reflects input from provinces and territories, from law enforcement and from experts. It shows what can be achieved when we focus on outcomes rather than slogans. Weakening this bill at report stage would undermine that work. It would create uncertainty at a moment where clarity is needed. It would send the wrong signal to communities that have been asking for leadership and follow through. Mr. Speaker, public safety is not a partisan issue. It is a shared responsibility. Bill C-14 reflects that understanding and is thoughtful, measured, and responsive to the realities Canadians are facing. This House has done important work on this bill. Now is the time to see it through. I urge all members to support Bill C-14 at report stage and allow this legislation to move forward so these reforms can make a real difference in communities across the country. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Alderman Norfolk.
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for her presentation on Bill C-14. My question pertains to, firstly, I agree that public safety is not a partisan issue, and so to highlight that was very noticeable in the speech. However, I want to just point my friend to the issue of mandatory minimums for the most heinous crimes. And we know that when those are eroded, when the public feels that the law is somehow, or judges are taking the law into their own hands and aren't punishing strictly for the most heinous crimes, what message does that send to society? And also the fact that so many of these mandatory minimums have been upheld, and now the public may see this as eroding things that the court has already ruled on that are necessary. I'd like my friend to elaborate on that. Thank you.
The Honourable Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-14 does not erode any mandatory minimums in this bill. This is an issue that has been litigated. In our democracy, we have independent institutions. We have our judiciary, the Supreme Court, which has enforced that this Parliament act, and a previous Parliament we had acted. But that does not mean that mandatory minimums still do not exist within our criminal code for specific crimes. So we have mandatory minimums in many instances, but this bill doesn't touch that area. So I'm wondering why the member is implying something, because I believe it's a little bit misleading, causing people to think that we have somehow eroded those minimums in this bill.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's interesting. First of all, I'm pleased to see that Bill C-14 is before the House. In fact, I had argued back in December that there's no reason why Bill C-14 should not have passed the House of Commons and the Senate before the end of last year. But what we have witnessed is that in the last election, our Prime Minister and ministers came with an election platform based on crime, looking at ways in which we could bring in legislation. The Conservative member just made reference to mandatory minimums. That's Bill C-16, which reinstates mandatory minimums, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if she could provide her thoughts on the package of crime legislation that we have brought forward based on the election platform, and we have seen a lot of frustration through filibustering from the Conservative Party, and it's time that we not only pass C-14, but the other aspects of legislation.
The Honourable Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the member raises a very good point. C-16 is legislation that is currently in the committee process, and it does reinstate mandatory minimums in the cases of child predators or sexual assault. It is very, very important that when we talk about protecting our children, that we make sure that our systems are in place in order to do so. So that is just one thing that's addressed in C-16. But in this bill, it's so important to recognize that, you know, it addresses organized auto theft, break and enter of homes, human trafficking and smuggling, assault, sexual assault, violent extortion, and many, many other things, including retail crime, repeat violent offenders. It's very important that we address these issues and get this bill passed from this House. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another piece of legislation is C2, lawful access. We hear a lot about the importance of fighting extortion. And when I think of Bill C2, this is a very powerful bill, but that will enable us to bring in lawful access, which gives more tools for our law enforcement agencies. And I wonder if the minister can provide her thoughts on why it's so critically important that we don't forget about Bill C2 and we see that legislation also pass.
The Honourable Secretary of State, about 40 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, it's incredibly important, and that's why we brought that bill back in June, and it's been very disappointing to see that there has been not any cooperation from the opposition parties, the Conservatives in particular, which we would expect would be the party, as they claim, of law and order, yet they are not allowing police the tools that they need to tackle modern-day crime. It's so important in the cases of child exploitation, sextortion, and extortions that are happening in so many communities across Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. The Honourable Member for Terra Nova, the Peninsulas.
Mr. Speaker, last year when I was nominated to be a Conservative candidate, I had an interesting conversation with Ches Crosby. Mr. Crosby asked me a tough question. He said, Jonathan, out of the 4 Conservative platform pillars, which do you think will be the most important to your constituents? So I took a moment and I thought real long and hard. Axe the tax, stop the crime, build the homes, fix the budget. All are very important issues. But in my rural riding, where people have to travel a long distance for work and drive large SUVs to handle our terrible roads and use pickup trucks as a form of doing their daily tasks, I figured axing the tax would be one of the biggest concerns in rural Newfoundland. But boy, was I wrong. It didn't take long for me to realize that stopping crime was one of the biggest issues facing rural Newfoundland and Labrador. Over the summer, communities in Conception Bay North were devastated by forest fires that swept through their communities. Families, seniors, and people all along that shore had to leave their homes to find a place to stay. And unfortunately, many of them lost their homes and have yet to return. But that wasn't the first fire they've experienced, Mr. Speaker. That was the 13th fire in less than 3 months. Multiple people in that community reported the fire previously as potential arson. Unfortunately, nothing was done. Even during the fires, I was told that people were sneaking in to the evacuated zones and breaking into homes. Imagine that, thieves as brazen to steal from the people that are suffering the most. Now, even while the community tries to rebuild, crime is rampant. I'm being told that truckloads of 2x4s being stolen, tools are being stolen on a regular basis, not one-time events, but repeatedly. People from the area are calling me, begging me, well, actually begging all of us parliamentarians to work together to solve this problem. Not only do they ask for increased policing, but they also ask for increased bail reform. Even everyday Canadians know that all these crimes are being committed over and over by the same people, and that the heart of the problem is in the justice system. They are desperate for change. They have even taken upon themselves to circulate petitions to call for change, a petition that I will be glad to present here in the House of Commons at a later date. But on the opposite end of my riding, they are having the same issue. Mr. Speaker, the town of Carmanville invited me to a regional event where people from neighboring communities were voicing their significant concerns for crime in the area. Parents in the meeting told me that they're worried to let their kids walk down the road to their friend's house nearby because of the increased amount of intoxicated drivers due to the excessive amount of drugs in the area. This is what makes the situation worse, is that town of Carmanville and the area feel completely abandoned. Their police station is empty. Yes, empty. They have 1 police station and 3 RCMP homes that are maintained and heated, but are empty. Completely empty. And quite frankly, they are abandoned. During the last Liberal decade, their police station has become completely eroded of personnel. But why? Why is it so hard for this government to secure police officers? When I chat with officers, a common theme comes up. Crime is up, but morale is down. Police are so frustrated with the justice system and their constant game of cat and mouse that they retire as soon as they can, eager to leave the force, and oftentimes even having to go on sick leave due to the mental health strain that this crime cycle creates. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, getting up every day, putting on your uniform, hoisting your gun, not knowing if you'll return to see your family that evening, risking your life just for the criminals you catch to get a slap on the wrist and a get-out-of-jail-free card. This massive increase in crime has even changed the fabric of our Newfoundland culture. Homeowners in the safest communities are locking their doors, not just at nighttime, but even during the day, while they're in their own home. Something not unheard of 10 years ago, but in some communities it may have even been considered rude and unfriendly to do so. Parents are more and more fearful of letting their children play in nearby parks and playgrounds. Cultural activities like mummering and even trick-or-treating are rapidly eroding as the risks become higher and higher. Cabin owners leave their properties not knowing what they'll come back to, with break-and-enters becoming a norm, all due to 10 years of Liberal failed policies. And when I see and hear crime rates going up and I hear of these violent crimes, I always thought it was a sign of the times. It's the way the world is. I just figured that our culture must be producing more criminals. But once I got to Ottawa, I learned what was really behind this change. It didn't happen because of whim, because of changes on TV. It happened because this Liberal government introduced the principle of restraint. This principle instructed judges who preside over thousands of bail applications to release the accused criminals at the earliest opportunity on the least restrictive restrictions. Conservatives feel that this is the core of the problem. Unfortunately, Liberals have decided to keep this language pertaining to the principle of restraint in this bill, keeping their soft on crime, hug-a-thug mentality. Additionally, this bill fails to get tough enough on conditional sentencing orders. Criminals are involved in robbery, gun, and trafficking offenses are still able to access house arrest. Over and over again at doors and meetings across my riding, people are sick and tired of these criminals getting arrested and getting nothing but a soft slap on the wrist. There's even a joke, and people say the criminals get home before the police are off duty. And crime should not be a joking matter. We need to get serious about it. Firstly, we need to get rid of this idea that criminals should get the least amount of punishment allocated by the law. If judges, courts, and prosecutors feel that these criminals deserve more time, they should get more time. Conservatives want to repeal the principle of restraint and replace it with a principle of prioritizing of community and public safety, as set out in our private member's bill, Jail Not Bail Act. Conservatives want to restore mandatory minimums for kidnapping, human trafficking, extortion, arson, and other serious violent crimes. When you speed, you know the consequences. There's a fine you must pay. It's a minimum, not an amount that you can go and negotiate. Why shouldn't human trafficking, one of the most horrendous crimes imaginable, have the same idea and have minimum consequences? So let's talk about bail reform. Jail not bail is something that conservatives chanted lonely for years. It wasn't until election time that these Liberals were pressured from the public to do something that they said that they would consider bail reform. Unfortunately, this bill misses the key aspects at the core of the problem. Conservatives know that judges and courts need to consider the full criminal history and outstanding charges of criminals. And many Canadians, including myself, are shocked that this is not already mandated. So Conservatives want to do exactly that. If we were in government, we would mandate courts to consider the full criminal history of the accused. It's just common sense. But here's the most unbelievable part. Right now, sometimes when you're out on bail, you may need surety, someone who supervises you, someone to vouch for you, ensure that you'll be back for court and that you'll behave while on bail. Yet, right now, the guarantor, the supervisor, could have been convicted in the past. Conservatives want to make sure that the people supervising these criminals out on bail aren't being supervised by other criminals. Conservatives want to require courts to enforce guarantor obligations and ensure that they do not have an indictable conviction. Additionally, Conservatives want to give the courts the power to make non-residents surrender their passports in situations where they feel is appropriate, reducing the chances of them skipping bail and continuing criminal activity in other countries. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are asking us to work together. And although we don't believe that this bill does enough, we are proud of the inputs and additions that Conservatives made in this bill during the process. We will continue to advocate for stricter penalties, for more policing, and a justice system that protects the community, not criminals. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Parliamentary Secretary, Governor Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, in the last federal election, under a year ago, Canada's new Prime Minister, made a commitment, an election platform, to deal with crime. Before the House of Commons, over the last number of months, we have seen a series of bills dealing with making our communities safer. Bill C-14, what we're debating today, should have passed at the end of 2025. It did not pass because of filibustering of the Conservative Party of Canada. There is a series of legislative bills that is there that needs to be passed. Yet we have the Conservative Party that's more motivated about raising money and self-interest than passing this suite of laws. My question to the member is, will he not take it as notice that Canadians want the legislative suite of bills to be passed, just not C-14? C-14.
The honourable member for Terranova, the Peninsulas.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government had 10 years of creating soft on crime. It wasn't until the public put them on notice that they decided to pretend to do something about it. They come out with this bill. He said, the member across the way say that they wanted to have it done by Christmas, yet they put the controversial Bill C-9 in front of it to try to take away the religious rights of people across this country, and they're obstructing getting this through, Mr. Speaker. So I'm frustrated, and this needs to keep going.
Questions and comments. Gets the eye comment the honourable member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for just his passionate speech, and my heart goes out to the members in your community that face violent criminals while they were going through a catastrophe. But it's endemic. It's an example of how our criminal justice system has failed us. When we look at Bill C-5 and Bill C-75 and we see a culture of releasing violent offenders, there's no wonder why 60% of Canadians feel that crime is rising in their community and that they are unsafe. How does my friend think that this bill is going to solve that problem, if at all, and restore confidence in the public?
The honourable member for Terranova, the Peninsulas.
So repeat offenders is something that happens over and over. When you go into communities in Newfoundland and Labrador, oftentimes the community, you ask who's the troublemaker, and everyone will point the finger to the same house. And the police know who it is, the community know who it is, but unfortunately there's not enough justice. The justice system is not prepared enough to handle the situation. And I think there are some small things in here that is in the right direction and that will fix some of that stuff. It's not as big as what Conservatives want, but we are definitely working with the Liberals to try to make that happen.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire.
Honourable member for Saint Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I have a question for him about the way we studied this clause by clause. There was a disagreement between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and we only had 2 sittings for discussions with witnesses, and then 1 for clause by clause. And then C9 went forward, and then we got to C14. In the Conservatives' opinion, for such a big bill, was 2 sittings only with witnesses enough?
Member for Terranova, the Peninsulas.
I can see the frustration in that of having more stuff to propose. The Conservatives wanted to make sure that we got this passed very quickly. We felt it was steps in the right direction, and that Canadians wanted this and wanted this rapidly. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire. The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar, about 33 seconds.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for that impassioned speech, and I appreciated him bringing light to the issue through a wonderful Christmas float this year, putting the Grinch in jail properly. But I wanted to highlight what he said, because I've seen it in my rural communities too. The social fabric of our community is changing because people are petrified. We're seeing violent carjacking. We're seeing rural crime rising. Could you just talk a little bit more about the impact on rural communities in particular?
And again, we'll ask questions through the chair. The honourable member for Terranova, the Peninsulas.
Yeah, rural Canada and rural Newfoundland, these were the safest places in the world. These were the places where nobody locked their doors, where everybody trusted each other, that there was a fabric that was there. And I talked about that a bit in my speech. That is lost, and it's heartbreaking that people growing up in small communities now have to live in fear of themselves and their children and their families. It's very sad. Thank you.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Saint Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start my speech by going back to the question and answer that I obtained about how we got to where we are today in debating this at report stage for C14. We said this. There was a lot of things that were said at committee, but also about C9, because there was a block amendment asking to remove the religious exception as an excuse for promoting hate. And this frustrated, to use my colleague's term, the Conservatives. I think we lost a lot of time on that bill. And then, as we said, C14 is something that people wanted. The Conservatives wanted it, the Liberals as well. And we had to get it adopted quickly. So there was an agreement between those two parties to accelerate the adoption process for C14. And I think, and that's where things went awry. For political gains, they cut corners, and I find this very unfortunate. This was an important bill. It's a big bill. It has a lot of 84 clauses that affect the criminal code and the Young Offenders Act as well. So there was a lot of modifications, amendments that were welcome, that corrected some legal vacuums. This was affecting very essential elements of the criminal code, including the presumption of innocence. And the Conservatives and Liberals found a way to ice C9 on hate speech, to discuss C14, and to really accelerate it. We found ourselves at committee at this bill. We only had 2 sittings of 2 hours each on this bill. And then they did a clause-by-clause study, which was for only one session from 5 p.m. till midnight. They just did it in one shot because we didn't have the time to do anything else, and they wanted to cut corners. And, Mr. Speaker, I believe that this is a very deplorable way of proceeding because they're kind of ignoring the very essential role of members to do their work as legislators. It shouldn't be such a political and partisan activity. They just want to. Each side wants a win. They want to say C4 was adopted. Too bad if it went through too quickly, or if they had to cut corners, or we have to do more work again later on it because we forgot some points. Too bad if the Supreme Court also has to review some provisions because we didn't have the time to do proper analysis and, above all, to discuss this properly with people on the ground who have to enforce this on a daily basis. So there are several aspects of this bill that affect the actual daily practice of defense criminal experts. And I think we could have given more time to hear from them. Did they have any recommendations, additional recommendations that could have been added to enhance this legislation? Perhaps we could have done this on a unanimous basis at committee. And this would have been really interesting to see. But we didn't have this opportunity because they really accelerated the process. And then there's another point that I'd like to note, is that there is, well, when we're talking about criminal law, they think that they can do everything through legislation and it'll solve all these issues. But most of these issues are usually solved by prevention or readaptation or rehabilitation, which requires more funding. So they think there's going to be a kind of a legislative Band-Aid solution, and they give people the false impression that there's safety. I'll give you an example, an ordinary one. If we increase sentences from 10 to 15 years in X cases, it won't necessarily reduce the number of incidents of a criminal act. No one thinks before they commit a crime, oh, you know what? It's now a 15-year sentence. Well, in jail, so I won't do this. Well, if it was 10 years before, okay, maybe, but some people sometimes think that everything can be solved through legislation. Nevertheless, there are still good elements in C14. We're going to vote in favor of it, and we were able to enhance some aspects of C14 via amendments. And this affects something that gets to the very heart of our new daily reality. It's the question of firearms. And in the recent years, we've seen a new increase in gun crimes, particularly in young people. These criminals are getting younger and younger, and we often have crimes that are committed with firearms or when they possess a firearm. And the Bloc's proposal as amendment was retained, and this was to include in the Criminal Justice Act when a crime is included with a firearm, it becomes a violent infraction, and this has an advantage in terms of the court. And the problem when we included this is that a judge previously, if there was a crime committed with a firearm, give this adolescent a sentence unless the Crown prosecutor pleaded an exceptional situation. So there had to be an exception to give a young person a sentence when they committed a gun crime. Now, we've opened the door to greater discretion for judges in these cases. So that's a legislative provision that will have a true impact on the ground and that will be very useful. And that was one of the Bloc's recommendations that was adopted. Another point that was adopted is to review the bill in 5 years. There is a committee that will be analyzing the implementation of this bill if there were some setbacks, and they'll be making recommendations about potential amendments or new provisions in light of charter rights that are amended by this bill, notably the presumption of innocence, as we said, because we have reversed the burden of proof in some cases, and we have an obligation to review this once again in a relatively short timeline. So a review in 5 years of this bill is a very welcome idea. And as I said, it would have been probably very useful to have more time to study this bill. Perhaps some people did not table amendments because they seemed more secondary in nature, and they wanted to focus on the major amendments, knowing that since we wouldn't have enough time to get to all of them. And I'll give you an example which may seem very minor, but it could have been the topic of discussion if we had more time. And I go back to the Act for Young People. One of the vacuums that was in this Act was for the amount of time we hold on to these files for young people, that we can serve them. And one of the clauses said that this case could be unconditionally we stop keeping the file for a record for a year. We keep it only 2 months after the person is acquitted or charged. But there was no timeline set out for how long this record would be kept if there was no charges filed. So the case law did not, it was somewhat unclear about how long to keep these records for.
We hope to correct this lack of clarity by saying 2 years. 2 years to keep the record. It's a long time, 2 years, especially when charges have not been laid. And it's that's the same amount of time for very different situations when charges are laid. We suggested looking into this 2-year time frame. Perhaps in some cases it should be 1 year, 90 days, 2 years. We could have a discussion about that. Because we had a lack of time, we were not able to have that discussion. Sure, it's a minor detail, but it would fill a void in our legal system. I think it's a shame that parliamentarians were assigned incredibly expedited timelines for purely partisan reasons. because people on both sides of the House wanted to just get C-14 out the door quickly. I think that's a shame. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. I would like to thank my colleague from Saint-Jean, whose riding borders my own. Listen, C-14 was intended to do three things. First, protect Canadian communities. Second, protect victims. And it does these things. And third, protect the independence and impartiality of the judicial system. It was also intended to make sure that Canadians have confidence in the administration of justice. I would say that the bill fulfills its objectives and is an important bill for that reason. I would like my colleague to give her thoughts on this. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. I would like to thank my colleague from La Prairie. I agree with the principles he laid out, and I noted that we will be voting in favor of the bill. The thing is, if we can have confidence in the justice system, we should also have confidence in the bill, and for that reason, we should have had more time to work on it. Perhaps the government believes this legislation is simply perfect and can't benefit from an amendment. I think that's a bit disrespectful to Parliament, especially given that Parliament contains a number of different parties elected by the people who may have different viewpoints. I think that we missed a good opportunity to increase public trust in legislation. We could have given the bill a more thorough analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for her speech. And first off, I want to acknowledge her concerns and frustrations with the way that this bill has got here, and the fact that really it's the Liberal government that refused to make this a priority last fall, and the position that Parliament's now facing with the lack of debate because of, I acknowledge, the partisan factors taken in place. But I want to talk more about why this bill is so important, or ask her that over the last decade, crime has gone up through the roof across this country. I know in my own riding, especially with repeat violent offenders, and the need for this bail reform is because of past Liberal bills that have weakened our justice system and our bail regime. Is the member hearing in her own riding these challenges with repeat violent offenders from law enforcement and her own constituents?
Honourable Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. There's a lot to unpack there. I will circle back to what I said earlier. The goals of the bill, as laid out by my colleague from La Prairie, are more public trust in the justice system and also a balance between various rights that exist. First, the right to feel safe in your community, and second, the right for the accused to a fair trial that respects the principle of the presumption of innocence. That balance is difficult to get right. And for that reason, it is even more important that we should have the time to analyze the bill with experts. This idea that the bill can just solve all problems is a false one. It's not a 100% perfect bill, and we should have heard from more experts about things like prevention and rehabilitation, which are also important to law enforcement. The Honourable Member for Bournemouth, Salaberry, Soulange, Huntingdon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was great. You absolutely nailed the name of my riding. Some of the best pronunciation I've seen. I would like to thank my colleague for her detailed speech. She's done her research. She has mastered her files. I know that she has a law background, so it's really fascinating to have someone with that expertise participating in this debate. Now, I understand in the House that the government is trying to send the message that any desire to debate a bill or improve it is filibustering. And I am incredibly disappointed by that because, in my view, as a parliamentarian, our job is to debate bills and improve them. Could my colleague comment on this? The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. It's a negative trend we're seeing from both the government and also the opposition. official opposition rather. They seem to think that if you take a long time to pass a bill, it is a waste of time, and therefore filibustering. But if you look at bills like C-15, which are 630 pages long, well, you absolutely have to take your time to study something like that. It needs to go to a number of committees. It's very complicated. I don't consider that to be filibustering. Meanwhile, when you look at how Conservatives are blocking the block modification of the hate speech legislation, then we could talk about filibustering. But calling all parliamentary debate filibustering is an insult to parliamentarians.
I'm very pleased to speak to this bill, and I'm also very pleased to have seconded the amendment submitted by MP for Saanich Gulf Islands, because I believe that we share values, that this bill required so much work, and at least her amendments can address so many of the flaws in the current iteration of Bill C-14. I thank the Criminal Lawyers Association for their work. I quote a submission that they've made, quote, there is indeed a bail crisis in Canada, but a crisis of detention, not release, end quote. Bill C-14 is not the answer Canadians need. Bill C-14 is a knee-jerk reaction to sensational headlines and high-profile incidents involving repeat violent offenders. Working hand in hand, Conservatives and Liberals rushed this bill through committee, holding only 3 meetings while ignoring the voices of experts and those most affected. The Prime Minister claims to represent Liberal leadership, yet openly supports and advances Conservative policies. Over 2/3 of Canadians did not vote for a Conservative government, but this is the agenda now being forced on Canadians. The NDP is firmly opposed to Bill C-14. As the NDP critic for both justice and Indigenous affairs, I am opposed to this bill because it fails Canadians. Instead of making communities safer, it will cause great injustice, deepen inequality, and trample on fundamental rights. Canadians deserve a better way forward. By relying on tough-on-crime talking points, the government hopes to satisfy public pressure, but real issues are overlooked. People struggling with poverty, mental health, and addiction are pushed further into the system. The bill offers nothing in the way of treatment, rehabilitation, or prevention. What it will do is put more innocent people behind bars for longer, sometimes for months before any trial. The cost will be paid by families and communities when people lose their housing, their jobs, or even custody of their children, all before they have been found guilty of a crime. Canada's current bail system is already one of the strictest in the world. In fact, 76% of those charged are now denied bail, up from 22% in 1978. More than 60% of people in provincial institutions are waiting for trial. 1/3 of people detained before trial are never convicted of any crime. They sit in crowded jails without access to addiction or mental health programs. Indigenous people are drastically overrepresented in these numbers. Although they make up only 5% of Canada's population, about 30% of federal inmates are Indigenous. People who are experiencing poverty, homelessness, addiction, or mental health challenges simply cannot meet the conditions for bail. They do not have a phone, they do not have stable housing or work, and they may not have friends or relatives to vouch for them. These are the people who will pay the price for this policy. Last year, the Department of Justice cut 264 jobs. In this fall budget, the Prime Minister mandated the reduction of the Justice Department operations by an additional 15%. We know that reduction means more cuts are coming. These departmental cuts will affect supports for low-income Canadians like legal aid, bail support programs, and community clinics. The bill in its current form narrows the principle of restraint, making it easier to keep people in detention. It expands reverse onus by forcing an accused person to prove why they should get bail instead of the Crown having to prove why they should not, weakening the principle of innocent until proven guilty. It toughens sentences, amends the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and makes sweeping changes that will further tax an already overburdened system. These are not evidence-based reforms. There is no clear data on how many people out on bail re-offend. We do not even collect standardized data on bail decisions. Rushing this bill through when experts and civil liberties groups ask for better information is not responsible lawmaking. We already have evidence of programs that do work. The John Howard Society has supervised bail programs in Ontario communities with over 90% success rates for a fraction of the cost of jail. These programs link people to addiction, mental health, and social services, and help those on bail meet the conditions set by the court. This is safer, less costly, and more humane. What we do need are real investments in community-based supervision available across Canada. We need prevention and rehabilitation programs to tackle the root causes of crime, including poverty, trauma, systemic racism, and colonial practices. We need national standards for data collection and risk assessment. Debate in Parliament is supposed to serve Canadians and strengthen democracy. But on this bill, the Liberals and Conservatives are shutting out progressive voices like the NDP. They are refusing to listen to the experts who have studied Canada's criminal justice system. Instead, they are moving quickly, relying on fear and political pressure rather than reason, evidence, and open debate. This approach leads to bad law and weakens democracy itself. When Parliament ignores those advocating for civil liberties, the rights of Indigenous peoples, and evidence-based solutions, we all lose. Democracy cannot thrive when important debate is suppressed and the government ignores the expertise of those working in the front lines. Canadians deserve a criminal justice system rooted in fairness and facts, not political theater. We need real solutions backed by evidence. The NDP calls on the government to stop, listen, and consult, especially with those who are experts and are most impacted by these laws. Democracy is best served when many voices are heard, not just one. That is why a stronger progressive presence in Parliament matters. When New Democrats speak up, critical issues like evidence-based justice, civil liberties, and the rights of Indigenous and marginalized people are not ignored. Canadians did not ask for a conservative agenda, but that is what we are getting when Liberals and Conservatives rush bills like C-14.
In comments, question et commentaire, the Honourable Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Although I agree with some parts of the member's intervention, I do also think that prevention is a very important part of solving the criminal situation that we have in the country, and rehabilitation upon conviction is very, very important, because one day people will be released, and we want to make sure that they are released with a plan, with the ability to work. And data is also a concern that I have shared as well. We've been asking the province to share bail data with the federal government so that it can strengthen our decision making, but they have been unable to do so. So it's something I plan on working on. But would the member not agree that repeat violent offenders being released back out are a public safety risk, and that...
The honourable member for Nunavut.
The fact that the member has stated that they haven't had data to develop this bill confirms what I've been saying. This bill was not based on evidence. And I agree that we need to make sure that we do have better prevention programs. And the best way to do this is to make sure that we're not keeping more people in jail the way that this bill intends to. And that's what we need to focus on. As the Criminal Lawyers Association has said, there is a crisis, but it's in detention, not on release.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague from Nunavut for her speech. It was well thought out, and while I respect a lot of what she had to say, I do disagree with a couple things. One, I wish we actually had a conservative agenda being brought forward by this government. But she talks about a lack of evidence. Daily we see in the newspaper victims of repeat violent offenders, victims of domestic violence from repeat violent offenders who are put in jail and are immediately brought back out. Daily we see this. So I think there is evidence of the failure of C-75, but what would be the NDP solution to these repeat violent offenders being let back out, abusing women, abusing children, and committing crimes against day-to-day Canadians?
Member for Nunavut.
I think that the sensationalization that the media shares is creating fear that is not necessary, and the focus needs to be on addressing violent offenders. And I hope that with this bill that it's not over, the way that this bill is, it's overgeneralizing to those that will be most impacted. We have heard that bail works right now, and that people that are violent offenders are kept in, and that's what the target needs to be of this bill, and that's not what it is at this point.
Very brief question. Questions and comments? Okay, Secretary of Safe Combating Crime, 20 seconds.
Yeah, does the member agree that removing conditional sentencing, allowing an offender, a repeat violent domestic abuser, back out onto the streets is uncalled for? Their amendment would remove that provision.
The honourable member for Nunavut, an equally brief response.
This bill required so much work that it was hard to support it right away. I very much appreciate the amendments that were tabled by the MP for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Don Valley North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to pay tribute to the life of Mrs. Goshen Nanji, who passed away in December at the age of 92. Mrs. Nanji arrived in Canada from Uganda with her family in 1972 and was a steadfast champion of her family's long-standing commitment to the North York General Hospital in my riding of Don Valley North. Together with her late husband, Mr. Pirlari G. Nanji, Mrs. Nanji played a transformational role through her vision and generosity that's reflected in the Gushin and Pirlari G. Nanji Orthopedic Center, the Nanji Family Foundation Center for Medical Imaging, the Nanji Academic Center, the Nanji Ambulatory Center, and the many other initiatives that have strengthened care for our community. Mrs. Nanji and the Nanji family are a testament to the transformative power of generosity. While we mourn her passing, we celebrate the remarkable legacy she leaves behind, a legacy that will carry forward and continue to inspire and connect people for generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Next week, Kosovo will celebrate the 18th anniversary of its independence. Canada has had a long and proud friendship with Kosovo, and I'm proud as a Canadian that they were one of the first countries to recognize Kosovo's independence. My wife is from Kosovo, and we spent part of our honeymoon there, where we enjoyed amazing food, and I learned so much about their rich culture. Kosovars are deeply proud of their country. I have one piece of advice. If you're in Kosovo, go to Rahovets and have a macchiato, the best coffee I've had in my life. My son, William Kastriot Seaback, is named after their national hero, a man who stood for courage and independence. I want to join with Kosovars around the world celebrating independence next week here in Canada and abroad. Urime dita e parvasis.
The honourable member for Tycon, Parkdale, High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we marked International Day of Women and Girls in Science. At a time when, in some parts of the world, the scientific community is being discredited and dismembered, Canada chooses a different path. We choose to invest in discovery, to trust evidence, to honour our late colleague, Kirsty Duncan. And we choose to celebrate and do this with the women and girls who are driving breakthroughs in labs, classrooms, and communities across our country. Last month at the Canadian Science Policy Conference, I had the privilege of hearing Dr. Shohin Igos, Professor of Physics and Computer Science at Wilfrid Laurier University, as she accepted a Trailblazer Award. She reminded us that some comets blaze brightly and some do not, but all are equally extraordinary. She quoted a haiku, a science haiku of her own devising. Let us be quantum, entangled across space-time, hearts and minds as well. This week, we recognize Dr. Gose and the many women whose curiosity, courage, and brilliance have shaped our world, and the generations of girls, like my daughter, who, because of them, know they belong in science.
The honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the outstanding work of Chrysalis, an Alberta Society for Citizens with Disabilities located in my riding of Edmonton Northwest. Chrysalis demonstrates a principle Albertans strongly believe in, that dignity is found in work, contribution, and self-reliance. For nearly 60 years, Chrysalis has empowered thousands of people with disabilities to pursue meaningful employment and greater independence and contribution to Edmonton and Alberta economies. Through practical supports and strong partnerships with local employers, Chrysalis always delivers results for the families they serve. Led by Executive Director Melinda Noyes and her dedicated team, their innovation in art, culinary, and culture helps set them apart. Mr. Speaker, when we remove barriers and focus on ability, we strengthen our workforce and our country. As Conservatives, we will always champion policies that support opportunity, responsibility, and the power of meaningful employment for all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Ottawa, Vanier, Gloucester. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about the World Day for Fighting Cancer. The whole world comes together for solidarity and hope. This is a day to honor those who lost their lives, as well as those who are still fighting, and to recognize the caretakers who are showing extraordinary courage every day. We remember Terry Fox, who's persevered and inspired an entire nation, if not the entire world. His memory still guides us today.
Fox Foundation announced that it has surpassed the milestone of $1 billion raised in support of life-saving cancer research, thanks to the contributions of millions of volunteers, partners, and supporters from coast to coast to coast. This historic achievement reflects the generosity of Canadians and their unwavering commitment to a future without cancer. Let this day be more than just a moment. Let it inspire us to keep on moving. Let us honor those fighting cancer by supporting progress wherever we can, and let us carry forward the journey that Terry Fox began. Let's finish it.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, across Canada, seniors are feeling the pressure of rising costs in very real ways. One of my constituents recently told me she feels like the walls are closing in as her fixed income is stretched further each month. This is why Conservatives are focused on practical solutions that will help bring costs down and restore stability for seniors and their families. Conservatives have constantly put forward constructive ideas and reached out to work with other parties, including through Opposition Day motions that offer real, workable solutions. The recent meeting between the Leader of the Official Opposition and the Prime Minister underscores the urgency of this work. Canadians are looking for results, not rhetoric. Conservatives will always set aside differences to find common ground when it leads to real results for Canadians. We urge other parties to do the same and focus on delivering solutions that ease affordability pressures for seniors and families.
Good job.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
February 15th marks the beginning of Nonprofit Sector Week of Appreciation, and I'm proud to rise today to celebrate the heart of our communities, our nonprofits, and the people behind them. These are our neighbors. They are friendly faces who step up when someone needs a ride, a meal, a place to call home, or a caring professional to talk to. Their dedication doesn't make headlines most days, but it makes a world of difference in Kitchener-Conestoga and across the nation. We are Canadian. We celebrate those who strengthen our communities through compassion, service, and the belief that we're better when we lift each other up. During this week of appreciation, coinciding with National Kindness Week, I encourage everyone to get involved. Volunteer your time, lend your skills, or simply reach out to a local nonprofit to ask how you can help. Sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the moment that someone remembers the most. To all nonprofit workers and volunteers, thank you. Your work reflects the very best of who we are as Canadians. Thank you, Speaker.
Honorable Deputy, the Kapuskasing Timmins Mushkegowuk.
The Honourable Member for Kapuskasing Timmins Mushkegowuk. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to introduce you to one of the 46 communities in my riding, the community of HoC. It is in the boreal forest in northeastern Ontario, with 2 sawmills, a plywood mill, and the Villeneuve Construction Company. These are the main employers. The town of HoC was shaped by generations of northern families and workers. They not only built industry, but also solid communities and a lasting future for their children. HoC is a unique region at the crossroads of language and tradition. French is not just a second language. It is a living language, and the bilingual nature of the community is part of our everyday lives, our economy, and our future. HoC is recognized as an emblem of French-Canadian culture and its drive to persist. Thank you.
The
Honourable Member for Beauharnois-Salaberry-Soulanges Huntington. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. Some people think Valentine's Day is too commercial or corny, and some people say that when you're in love, you don't need a special day, whereas people who are single may not feel it has anything to do with them. But I think that we need, more than ever, to have a day to celebrate love. At a time like this, when there is tragedy, when times are uncertain, and when we're wondering what the future holds, well, more than ever, we need to love one another. And we need to remind each other that we love each other. It's an important time to love and be loved. It's absolutely necessary at a time like this. And it's not a bad idea to set aside a day to love one another. To all those who are in love or who want to be, to all those who need love, to those who I love, my partner, my children, my grandchildren, and to all of you, I would like to wish you happy Valentine's Day.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre.
Speaker, last week was International Development Week, and it was remarkable to learn from partners whose efforts make Canada a leader in development work around the globe. From speaking at Carleton University about how refugees in Canada can contribute to development work globally, to discussing how to bridge the gap between trade and development, it was very productive and enlightening week. I also had the honor to host the brave women of the Afghan Women Parliamentarians and Leaders Network, who shared the impactful stories of their work to fight for peace, democracy, and women's rights in Afghanistan. Speaker, Canada's international development work makes me proud to be a Canadian, and I'm glad to have the chance to support it. Merci.
The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
It was 16 years ago this month, Mr. Speaker, when Canadians from coast to coast came together to celebrate the most dominant performance in Winter Olympic history. 26 medals, 14 of them gold, none more iconic, of course, than Sidney Crosby's golden goal, eliminating the United States and reclaiming Canada's rightful place as the undisputed hockey nation of the world. It was a moment etched into the very memory and identity of this great country, a defining moment of national unity and national pride. Whether you were watching that final game from your living room or at a bar or with the thousands crammed outside of Live City in Yaletown as I was, it was one of those rare instances of pure, unadulterated joy. I know I speak for all members of this House when I wish our amazing athletes representing Canada the best of luck and all the success in the world. And to Nate, Sid, Connor, and the boys on the ice, let's go get another gold medal.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, in my riding, Many people leave a real mark in our lives, and I'd like to talk about Serge Paquette. He has given 25 years or more of service to the town of Blainville. He's more than an elected official. He's a good neighbor, a support for his community. He was often to be seen in community activities, right on the ground, in neighborhoods. He's been there throughout the growth of our community. He's strengthened the tissue of our community. And I'd also like to mention the role of his wife, who has brought her warmth to local community life. She is an integral part of the legacy that they will both leave. They're the kinds of people who define social service and love of community. On behalf of everyone in Thérèse de Blainville, I'd like to thank Serge Paquette and Madame Boisvert-Paquette.
The Canadian dream of home ownership is fading for young Canadians. A new report from CMHC highlights that home building is expected to fall in each of the next 3 years and that housing prices will rise. Another report from Missing Middle Initiative shows that nearly half of young Canadians are having to leave the community that they were raised in because they cannot afford to live there, Mr. Speaker. The report states further that over 90% of young Canadians are concerned about the state of housing in Canada. Mr. Speaker, it is time to restore hope in the promise of Canada. Hope in the promise that if you work hard, you play by the rules, that you can afford a good home in a safe neighborhood, Mr. Speaker. And that's why Conservatives are advocating for a plan to take the sales tax off of new homes under $1.3 million, a plan to cut bureaucracy and accelerate home building so that all Canadians can afford a place to call home.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to speak about Scout Week, which will take place from February 16th to 22nd. Throughout Canada, the movement brings together 10,000 young people, as well as over 3,000 adult volunteers. The scouting movement is something that represents solidarity, community, and respecting nature. And it is a movement that is training 10,000 future strong citizens. In my riding, La Prairie et Tadigan, I'd like to congratulate this scouting group. These dynamic young people, with François de l'Étoile, their mentor, have participated in the Christmas market in order to fund their trip to the international scouting meeting in Switzerland. Their determination and efforts are worthy of Baden-Powell. I'd like to congratulate everyone who's participating in Scouting Week 2026. Thank you for everything you've done.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Surgeon River.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have signed on to $52 billion taxpayer dollars to subsidize EVs. There's one big problem, however, and that is that only a single EV model is manufactured in Canada. Consequently, $52 billion taxpayer dollars are going directly to subsidize foreign EVs and foreign auto workers. This at a time when thousands of Canadian auto jobs have been lost in the face of U.S. tariffs. Meanwhile, the Liberals are opening the floodgates to 50,000 Chinese EVs. This is a straight-up $52 billion foreign giveaway that undermines Canadian autos and Canadian jobs. You literally cannot make this stuff up. Liberal incompetence knows no bounds.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, so thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, less than a year ago, Canadians elected a prime minister and a large Liberal government. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, part of that platform was to bring together a legislative agenda to deal with crime. Issues like lawful access, hate propaganda, bail reform, restoring mandatory minimums, a substantial legislation to deal with making our communities safer. The problem is the Conservative Party wants to filibuster the crime package, Mr. Speaker, and that is serving Canadians not in a very positive way. Further, Mr. Speaker, we have the budget implementation bill that delivers for Canadians in every way. I'm calling upon the Conservative Party to stop filibustering, start listening to what Canadians want. They want a strong, healthy Canada. Get off your back ends and start supporting our legislation.
Oral questions. Question oral. The honourable member for Barrie North Innisfil.
They've stolen all of our ideas. A recent Missing Middle Initiative report shows just how many young people have lost hope of ever owning a home. For parents and grandparents, the signs have been obvious for years, and if we're honest about it, the problem started well before Donald Trump became the President of the United States. Despite throwing tens of billions of dollars at the problem, the fact remains that 10 years of structural incompetence and liberal policies have caused house prices and rent to double, and with it, lost hope of home ownership for a generation. Here's an idea. Why not remove the GST on all new homes to at least start restoring the hope of home ownership for young Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's most disappointing to see that the Conservatives yesterday voted against a national strategy for housing for young Canadians. Instead, on this side, we care deeply about housing affordability for young Canadians. That's why we have the Build Canada Homes Act before the House, which will catalyze innovation in home building and bring down costs for young Canadians and all Canadians.
A member for Barrie South Innisfil.
We voted against more bureaucracy and more red tape instead of getting the job done. Our kids are worried and our grandkids are worried, Mr. Speaker. In 10 years, home ownership among 30 to 34-year-olds fell 60 to 52%. It's even steeper with young people. 93% of Gen Zs and millennials are worried about the state of housing in Canada today. Unfortunately, unaffordability is reshaping communities, with nearly half of young Canadians reporting they've considered leaving their current city or province. This isn't a tariff issue, it's a self-inflicted wound caused by failed policies. Can we at least agree to start restoring the hope of owning a home for young people by removing the GST on all new homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Citizenship and Immigration and Refugees.
The government has taken a step in that direction. The GST measure is known to the member and it's awaiting royal assent. With respect to getting home ownership going in this country, I agree. We do need to do collectively more to push that. And that is something that the Canadian Home Builders Association in particular has emphasized. What they've also emphasized, Mr. Speaker, is the need to attack regulatory red tape at the municipal level. That's why this government has put in place the Housing Accelerator Fund. In return for federal dollars, municipalities are required to be more flexible when it comes to zoning. That's exactly what we're seeing in almost 240 municipalities.
The member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
It's Liberal government policy that's crushing the dream of home ownership for Canadians, but it doesn't need to be that way. We have the land, the resources, and the skilled workers to address this problem, but a staggering 87% of Canadians are concerned about housing in Canada, and 9 in 10 of those people, well, they're young Canadians. So the Liberals have an opportunity to work with Conservatives to take a real Team Canada approach. So will they work with us to take the tax off of new homes and slash development charges by half to restore the dream of home ownership for young Canadians?
Here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Housing and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservatives have the opportunity to work with us on this side of the House by supporting the Budget Implementation Act, which has funding for housing enabling infrastructure through the Build Canada Strong Fund. It also includes measures to decrease the GST, in particular for first-time homebuyers and young Canadians. And, importantly, they can support the Build Canada Homes Act, which is catalyzing innovation and modern methods of construction to bring down home building costs for everyone.
Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
With all of those words and all of the billions that they spend, they still aren't getting homes built. And it's the government's own housing agency, the CMHC, that's blowing the whistle. Construction of new homes will drop by as much as 18% with all of the catalyzing that they're doing. Canadians know that another liberal bureaucracy isn't the answer. And so that's why today we approach them, we extend our hand in the spirit of collaboration with real solutions that will help address the problems that Canadians see with the end of the dream of home ownership. Will they slash development charges, cut them in half, and take the tax off new homes? Work with us today.
Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They're all talk, we're all action. In 100 days, Build Canada Homes has secured landmark agreements with provinces and cities. It's advanced construction on 6 federal lands. We've lined up thousands of new homes for construction, and over the past month alone, affordable housing projects are well underway in Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Ontario. We're ready to deliver 7,500 homes right away. This is how we accelerate housing. The momentum is building. They should join us.
The Honourable Member for Montmorency-Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, the CMHC is forecasting a drop of nearly 20% in housing starts over the next 2 years. Less production means less supply. Demand, however, continues to rise, so prices are inevitably going up. And in my riding, the average price of a home has risen from $249,000 to over $500,000 in 10 years. The Liberals are patting themselves on the back for these policies, yet the construction industry is talking about a lost decade for home ownership. When will these announcements finally lead to shovels hitting the ground and construction in the real world and not just on paper? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the member for his question. When we talk about housing, I met with the mayors in my riding, and they are waiting with anticipation for this historical investment in municipal infrastructure that we need to build more homes in Quebec. So I would invite my colleague to vote in favor of our legislation for the Budget Implementation Act so we can give the municipalities the funding they need to build homes in Quebec. Like my colleague said, everyone is waiting. Young Canadians are having a tough time with the cost of living and the cost of rent. The Liberals tell us they're taking action, but nothing's being done except for these announcements and photo ops. They have a plan for someday. You'll see they'll build something one day, potentially, surely soon, in a project that's currently being reviewed to be announced later. I have a clear proposal for the Liberals. Why don't you eliminate the GST on all new homes under $1.3 million to boost construction and allow for our young people to finally become homeowners? Will you accept our idea? The Honourable Member. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Good news. Build Canada Homes is delivering results. In the first 100 days, we have moved to action by including major agreements with provinces and cities. We have 6 projects announced for construction, and one in my riding of Longueuil-Charlevoix. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we're building more than 1,000 units in my riding, 40% of which are off-market builds, and I invite my colleagues across the way to share this good news. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, according to the government, thousands of seniors cannot receive their pensions because of the QM software, and there's a cost overrun of $5 billion. Thousands of victims and more public spending than anticipated, and the Liberals are trying to act like this problem doesn't exist. They're saying these are rare and isolated cases, and they think they can just erase this without any explanations. When are we going to have an independent inquiry into this? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the modernization of this system, an update of this 60-year-old system was necessary, and we have to make it easier for seniors to access these benefits. And now millions of seniors are receiving their benefits every day. And this is the biggest digital innovation initiative ever undertaken by the government. Service Canada is trying to help all those who are facing issues and is trying to solve them quickly. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. They're not talking about the 86,000 people or the $50 billion in overruns. The Liberals need to see the scope of this issue. There were ministers in Quebec that quit for a small cost overrun, and now they're talking about billions extra, and they're just shrugging their shoulders. They think they're not accountable to anyone, these Liberals. We need a public and independent inquiry. When are they going to accept this? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this is the biggest digital transformation ever undertaken, and most of seniors are registered in the system and are receiving their pensions correctly and within the proper deadlines. We've asked members to provide names of constituents who are being affected, and we've also offered an information session on this system. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, we need a public and an independent inquiry into Current because the Liberals are disconnected from reality. We're looking at 86,000 seniors affected, and they think this is just a banal issue. They're falling through the cracks of this IT systems, and they're just shrugging their shoulders. There are people who are not getting their old age security, and they haven't received it in months. And how are these people going to live, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, our government always supports seniors, particularly thanks to their dental care and the new grocery benefit. The old age security issue is an absolute priority, and the minister is working tirelessly to solve this issue. The department has implemented an action plan for this to mobilize all the available resources to solve this issue. Thank you.
Honourable Member for York-Durham.
Day by day, year by year, the dream of home ownership is fading away for young Canadians. The Prime Minister's promise was for 500,000 new homes, but CMHC reported this week that he'll only actually build 216,000 and that home building will decline every year to 2028. So does the Prime Minister dispute the CMHC's findings? And if he doesn't, will he admit that he made a promise he knew he could never keep? And Mr. Speaker, we all know what that's called.
Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of International Trade.
Well, this is precisely the reason why, Speaker, the Prime Minister and his government is completely focused on building more homes in our country. That is why we have brought in a piece of legislation, Bill C-20, that is going to create Build Canada Homes, that is going to ensure that we build more housing across this country. That is why we have hired somebody like Anna Bala, who has the knowledge and expertise to make this happen. We are taking concrete actions. We're not just talking about things. I'm really happy to hear that there's some talk of collaboration from the opposition. That is a good sign. Let's work together to build more housing across our country.
The Honourable Member for York-Durham.
Where are the homes, Mr. Speaker? Where are the homes? They keep talking about building, but we see no action. And in fact, not only will home building decrease, CMHC says that home prices will rise. So we have less supply, more demand, and higher prices. That's a nightmare scenario for young Canadians. So it appears to me that the Prime Minister's lofty political promise was nothing more than Romeo's lie when he swore his love on blessed yonder moon. So will the Prime Minister instead adopt our proposal to cut the GST on all new homes?
I'm just going to pause just very briefly. The member's very close to the line there, even when quoting Shakespeare, being the MP from Stratford. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague opposite for the great question. When I'm home talking with constituents in Fredericton or Armagh, what I hear is that they appreciate that our Prime Minister and our government has a plan. A plan to diversify our exports, foster and facilitate interprovincial trade, and make historic investments in the infrastructure that's going to enable all of this. This is going to mean a stronger economy, more housing, better paying jobs, and long-term careers. I also hear that they want us to work together. So let's do that. Let's work together and get this done. Thank you very much.
Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, the Canadian dream of home ownership is fading for young Canadians. CMHC now warns that home building will fall over the next 3 years, with 2028 housing starts projected to be down 18% compared to 2025, even as prices continue to rise. At the same time, nearly half of young Canadians say they're being forced to leave the communities they were raised in because they cannot afford to live there. When will the government adapt our plan to remove the GST on all new homes and restore the dream of home ownership for young Canadians.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Refugees.
The Honourable Member is a new member. I want to commend him. He has been very active in the community. It's been good to get to know him and to work with him. I know he cares also, of course, about home ownership. He has met with the London Home Builders Association recently, and what they've shared is exactly what I said earlier, that regulatory red tape at the municipal level stands as the largest impediment to getting more homes built. Unless we address that, there won't be home ownership worthy of calling the right outcome for Canadians. What we need to do is push that. The Housing Accelerator Fund does exactly that. London is moving in that direction. Other municipalities are too.
Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to spike government announcements and stage photo ops, the data clearly shows that we're not building enough homes to meet Canada's needs. An insufficient supply of new homes is why CMHC expects prices to keep rising. Just this week, I also met with London members of the Canadian Home Builders Association, and they informed me that taxes and regulatory costs have risen 700% over 25 years and now make up 30% of the price of a new home. At what point will this government acknowledge these burdens and adopt our plan to remove GST on new homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Minister of Public Works and Transformation.
Mr. Speaker, our government has a plan to build Canada strong. We have a plan to create good jobs across this country, to attract investment across this country. We are building industrial capacity, building affordable homes, and investing in our future. And we've also introduced a new Buy Canadian policy, so we are our own best customer. That's how you build Canada strong, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Smilkini, South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
The government's own housing agency shows fewer homes being built over the next 3 years, while home prices will only rise. A third of home builders are building less because they're forced to lay off workers. Young men and women in BC are seeing the dream of home ownership fading. Years of Liberal home building programs have not delivered. Will the Liberals adopt our plan to remove the GST on all new homes to help builders build and young Canadians buy?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague from British Columbia for the question. I'm so proud to stand on the side of the House as we build Canada strong from coast to coast to coast. Building Canada's housing is very important, not only in cities and provinces, but in First Nations communities. I live on a First Nations community whose housing list is over 500 people. These people want to come home to their communities. That's why I'm so proud of this new policy. That's why I know that my children are to be able to live where they please with their families for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Calgary Nose Hill.
The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation just said that by 2028, new housing starts will fall by as much as 18.1%. And meanwhile, the Liberals continue to bring in hundreds of thousands more temporary foreign workers and have no plans to get millions with expired visas to leave. Housing starts aren't keeping up with immigration, and the Canadian dream of home ownership is fading for young people. When will the government adopt our positive plan to incentivize home building by removing the GST on all new homes and restore the dream of home ownership for young Canadians?
Yeah, let's go. The Honourable Minister of Emergency Management.
Mr. Speaker, we're building big in this country, and that means building more homes. While the Conservatives belittle what's been done so far, it's time to check some facts. In Calgary's a recognized national leader in terms of fast-tracking housing projects using federal program funding, like the Housing Accelerator Fund, building affordable and inclusive and resilient communities. If the Conservatives really cared about housing for young people, they'd support our plan, which will deliver real results for Calgarians and Albertans.
I'm from Calgary Nose Hill.
Rents have doubled in Calgary, and it's not just the dream of owning a home that's fading for young Canadians. Data shows that the prospects of getting a good-paying entry-level job for Canadian youth has never been dimmer. Canada's economy is slow, and now artificial intelligence is changing entry-level jobs in almost every field, including law and accounting. Given all of this, why are the Liberals bringing in hundreds of thousands of more temporary foreign workers, have no plans to get millions with expired visas to leave, instead of incentivizing businesses to hire and give hope to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Management.
Mr. Speaker, affordability starts with opportunity, and that means making sure every Canadian can get a good-paying career. Our plan is working. Just last month in Alberta alone, nearly 42,000 good full-time careers were created. That's more people earning paychecks, putting money back in the economy, and getting ahead. At a moment when Canadians are focused on affordability, it's time for Conservatives to stop blocking the Budget Implementation Act and back a plan that's delivering real results.
The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Bloc Québécois leader met with the Prime Minister. He insisted that we absolutely have to end these low-cost truckers. And that's not all. It's not only the federal government's not doing much on this file, they're even part of the problem. Canada Post hired no less than 25 companies that are using these low-cost trucking companies, and they're doing this with taxpayer money. When the Liberals get these low-cost drivers off our roads instead of just taking out their checkbooks, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, Canada Post is proud to work with many trucking companies across this country, and in doing so, the CEO of Canada Post has ensured us that there is no engagement with the Drivers Inc. model. All contracted suppliers are provided with clear expectations, a code of conduct to abide by, and consequences for non-compliance. As a government, we expect Canada Post to abide by these standards. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, they could solve this issue if they started admitting that these do exist instead of encouraging these low-cost drivers. Canada Post has used at least 25 companies of this type. We provided many solutions to get these dangerous drivers off our roads, but they continue. And not only are they not using these solutions, but they're hiring these low-cost drivers. It raises a fundamental question. Why do these Liberals not want to solve the problem? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Canada est fier.
Canada Post is proud to be able to cooperate with many trucking companies across the country. By doing so, the CEO of Canada Post has assured us that this company has no links to the Drivers Inc. model. All of their subcontractors have clear agreements and a code of conduct to respect, and a consequence if they do not respect this. As a government, we expect these standards to be respected by Canada Post.
China, our biggest security threat. Now he tells us that they are a strategic partner. He told Canadian canola farmers to expect lower tariffs by March 1st. Yet just yesterday, we learned that Beijing is delaying its decision until at least March 9th. Last time I checked, partners keep their word. Our farmers deserve better than uncertainty, shifting timelines, and empty promises. Yet that's all this Liberal government has delivered. So I ask, is there truly a deal to reduce tariffs on Canadian canola, or did the Prime Minister mislead our farmers about getting results?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to start by saying that our canola grower grow the best canola in the world. Absolutely. They're doing a tremendous work. And yes, we have a great partnership, a renewed strategic partnership with China to export canola. And in fact, we know that Chinese importers have already secured 650,000 metric tons of Canadian canola, which is 25% of China's total import last year. So, Mr. Speaker, the door is wide open now, and we will continue to engage in reaching a strong global...
The Honourable Member for Portage Lisgar.
That did not instill any confidence for Canadian canola growers. The Prime Minister's deal with Beijing opens our streets up to 49,000 Chinese EVs annually, jeopardizing our security and our auto jobs. He assured Canadians that everything was fine, telling us that we'd have canola tariffs drop by March 1st. But yesterday's announcement that China is pushing back its decision on tariffs until March 9th, we can't now be sure that he's delivering anything at all. So farmers are left hung out to dry. And in exchange for what? Fancy photo ops and false promises. Can our farmers actually expect lower tariffs, or was the Prime Minister merely hoodwinked into making concessions for nothing in return?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure my colleague that the new partnership that the government has secured with China is being implemented. We have orders, and in fact, orders have been placed, and the commerce is resuming right now with China. So it's a good news. I invite my colleague to come to us if he wants more detail, but the commerce is resuming with China, definitely.
Member for Bow River.
Commerce resuming doesn't mean tariffs are coming off. Beijing has postponed its decision on whether it will reduce tariffs on Canadian canola just weeks before seeding begins. Decisions need to be made now by farmers. Last year, many farmers, including me, chose not to seed canola because of those tariffs and the price collapse. Yet the Prime Minister stood before Canadians and said tariffs would fall to 15% by March 1st. The Liberals promised action. All they've delivered is dust. Did the Prime Minister mislead Canadian farmers?
Hear, hear. Minister of International Trade.
Speaker, we will not rest until normal trade resumes to make sure that canola is being shipped to all markets around the world, including China. And that's why the Prime Minister and this government has been working really hard. That is why the Prime Minister visited China to help reduce the tariffs of canola. As my colleague said earlier, we are so fortunate to have one of the best canola grown right here in this country. There's a demand for that canola across the world. That's why we are negotiating free trade agreements with countries like Philippines and Indonesia and Vietnam, where we can export this canola as well, and we will continue to do that work.
Member for Regina Wascana.
Mr. Speaker, last month during the Prime Minister's visit to Beijing, he announced that he finally had a deal to roll back that country's tariffs on Canadian canola. He even had a grandiose signing ceremony with Xi Jinping in front of Canadian and Chinese flags. But yesterday, the Chinese announced that they were postponing their decision until March 9th. So, Mr. Speaker, is Beijing backing out of the deal, or was the Prime Minister misleading Canadian canola farmers in the first place?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I just answer and reassure my colleague that trade is resuming with China. But I want to also highlight that the Agriculture Minister next week will be in Mexico, opening even more the market. We secure market for meat, and now he want to expand these opportunities. And we're not stopping there, Mr. Speaker, because we have the best food in the world, and the world want our food, and we will make that possible.
Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Despite the Prime Minister announcing that China will reduce tariffs on canola by March 1st, reports say the Chinese Commerce Ministry revealed that it only committed to making a decision by March 9th. What kind of master negotiator is the Prime Minister when he refuses to acknowledge that the deals he promised with China and the U.S. are falling through? Canadian farmers are looking for the truth, to be able to plan this year's crops to ensure that Canadian households can afford to eat Canadian quality products. Did the Prime Minister mislead Canadian farmers into thinking he got a deal done on Canadian canola?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of International Trade.
Speaker, this government is working day in and day out to ensure that we are diversifying our trade, that we are working with as many countries as possible. As we speak, the Minister of International Trade is visiting places like Singapore and Vietnam so that we can create opportunities in those markets. The Standing Committee on International Trade just recently have sent two bills, one dealing with the United Kingdom, the other dealing with Indonesia, back to this House so that we can finalize those trade agreements. Every single of those agreements ensures that our agricultural farmers, including Kelowna farmers, have new markets to sell their products.
Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, at Human Committee earlier this week, members from the Breakfast Club of Canada and the Coalition for Healthy School Food talked about the real impact of National School Food Program on kids and families. When a motion was brought forward to study those impacts, Conservative and Bloc members chose to adjourn debate before it even began. Can the Parliamentary Secretary for Children and Youth remind the House of how this program is supporting children, helping families with affordability, and why it matters that we continue to move this work forward?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for representing the great people of Carleton and the issues that they care about. Kids cannot learn if they are hungry. A new study from the Breakfast Club of Canada shows that school food programs improve educational outcomes, reduce childhood obesity, and increase disposable incomes for families facing rising costs. Canada was the last country in the G7 to have a national school food program. Now we do. The budget makes it permanent. It's a shame that Conservative members don't think that kids' health and school food are worth studying or voting for.
The Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
For almost 2 years, flight attendants told this government and parliamentarians that they were working for free. And we believed them. Conservatives introduced a bill to fix that problem. Liberals didn't believe them, and they ordered a study. After 6 months, this study, wait for it, has determined it needs to do another study. You actually can't make this stuff up. Why won't the Liberals believe flight attendants when they say they're working for free and adopt the Conservative bill that would have fixed the problem instead of ordering another study to study a study?
Parliament Secretary for Labour.
Mr. Speaker, nobody should work for free in this country. We take any claim of unpaid work seriously. After allegations of unpaid work in the airline sector, we launched a probe to get to the bottom of the claims. Phase 1 of that probe has now been published, and we're going to keep investigating to ensure that the work is happening in accordance with the Canadian Labour Code. Workers must be paid for the hours they work, and we're going to make sure that employers follow the rules.
For Dufferin-Caledon.
Yeah, except this probe that they ordered determined that they needed to do another probe. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things that you could say about that, Mr. Speaker. But here's the facts. The head of QP Air came to committee when we were looking into this and said, what are the Liberals going to study next if water is wet? And he went on to say about this study, we called for action last summer, and instead we got a study that resulted in a promise to perform another study. This is really thin gruel from these Liberals. Conservatives know flight attendants work for free. It's why we introduced a bill to fix it. Why don't they just steal that idea like they steal all of our ideas and help flight attendants instead of doing another study?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary for Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we stand by the work that we're doing. We want to take action that is informed by evidence, and we've asked all sides in this to actually provide that evidence. Phase 2 of the probe will collect more evidence from airlines and unions to ensure that employers are complying with the Canada Labour Code. This step is necessary to provide additional clarity on how the airline sector's pay structure aligns with the code. This is important information for us to know and to get right.
For North Island, Powell River.
Devastated, anxious, fearful of what the future may hold. I'm sure these are just some of the emotions the 25,000 Canadians who lost their jobs last month undoubtedly feel. These are individuals, like all Canadians, who even when they were working were already struggling with the cost of groceries, the cost of rent, the cost, Mr. Speaker, of just getting by. Now, not only are they dealing with a cost of living crisis, they are out of a job. This Prime Minister promised the fastest growing economy in the G7, but when will his policies deliver anything other than job losses, massive deficits, and the highest cost of groceries of our economic peers?
I'm going to allow the member to answer the question, but I'll just remind members they should be with their own seat, in their own seat when they ask a question. Now I'm a parliamentary secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I commend the member on...
Order. I'm going to ask members to restrain themselves and not be inappropriate or childlike in terms of the comments they make. Member.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. It gives me the opportunity to say that Bill C-19 has received royal assent. It shows what we can do when we work together in this House of Commons. Of course, that is the groceries and essentials benefit that will provide up to $1,900 for a family of 4 in what is certainly a difficult time for this country. But I also urge the member to look past politics, to work with all members in this House, and to echo what Prime Minister Harper said. Let's work together on behalf of the country in a very difficult moment. We can do it.
For North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, working together is great, but this question was about jobs. And in the real world, Liberal rhetoric and platitudes don't create a single job. GDP was flat in November. Real GDP is projected to decline. The Bank of Canada says business investment will remain weak. Meanwhile, 5,400 forestry workers in coastal BC are already out of a job. This government promised to build nation-building projects and create jobs at a speed like we've never seen before. My question for the government, where are these projects and where are these jobs?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliament Secretary, the Minister of Industry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be associated with a government whose record on jobs is very strong, with jobs growing faster here, even in the United States, where incomes are growing faster than inflation. And with the next part of our plan, the Budget Implementation Act, C-15, before this Parliament right now, the honourable member opposite can work with his colleagues to work with us to ensure speedy passage of that act to get major projects that the member is talking about. And the economic growth that is behind this bill for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A member for Red Deer.
Mr. Speaker, the price of food is out of control. Too many families in Alberta are struggling. Just in Alberta alone, grocery prices have risen 50% in 5 years. Beef prices are up 53%, eggs up 37%, vegetables up 20%. These are not luxuries, these are essentials, and Canadians can't afford this Liberal government. The Prime Minister said he should be judged by the cost at the grocery store. Well, Judgment Day is coming. When will the Prime Minister remove taxes, start getting things built so Canadians can live affordably?
The Honourable Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we had a big announcement addressing this very issue because we know it is something that Canadians are struggling with, and therefore we have announced the new Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit. Mr. Speaker, this not only gives a one-time benefit to Canadian families, but also helps them for the next 5 years. But we're not only doing that, Mr. Speaker, we're also looking at how to strengthen our supply chains. We're investing in companies that are in the business of food manufacturing. We're investing in greenhouses so that we can have more food in our country. Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis St. Laurent Takiawanrock. Mr. Speaker, one thing that people don't understand about the current affordability crisis is that it's impacting the birth rate. There are couples who are waiting to buy a home before they have children. As one expert has explained, I don't want my children to have less than I had growing up. That's what the Canadian dream means, and unfortunately the Canadian dream is being shattered by 10 years of Liberal governance. Why won't they adopt our idea of lifting the GST on new homes? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comment from my colleague. In Northern Ontario, I recently met with real estate organizations, and we spoke about the need for affordable housing, including housing with support services. The real estate industry expects us to pass the Build Canada Homes Act, as well as the Budget Implementation Act. I would encourage my colleagues to vote with us. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Louis St. Laurent Takiawanrock. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the Liberals have been in power for 10 years, and for 10 years, the Canadian public has been disappointed by their inaction on the housing file. And the future does not look any brighter. CMHC is projecting an 18% reduction in home building. You need to take the bill by the horns here. There needs to be something positive offered to the public. So why won't the government adopt our approach of lifting the GST on new homes? Because that would impact all of Canada positively. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Speaker, I agree that housing and affordable housing especially are important. I hope that we will be able to continue federal action, which has led to thousands of housing units being built in Quebec, for example, in Longueuil. The Liberals should vote in favour of our Budget Implementation Act so we can, in fact, build affordable housing. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All week, I have been asking questions about the CURAM system. This was a financial fiasco, which was supposed to cost $1.6 billion, but instead ended up costing $6.6 billion. It has left 86,000 seniors waiting for their money, and the only answer I've gotten back from the government is, could you send us their names? Seriously, I guess that's what the Liberals think of as leadership. I'll give them one more chance to give an answer other than send us their name. If they give the same answer again, it will prove their incompetence. Hopefully, they'll show leadership this week. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, as I have stated, this is the largest digital transformation ever completed. The overwhelming majority of people in the system are correctly receiving their benefits on time. We've reached out to members' offices to ask for the names of impacted persons. We have also offered opposition members a briefing on the system. We will always support seniors through benefits, including our dental benefit. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, honestly, I'm speechless. I'm sorry, but they have just proven their gross incompetence. They have just proven the lack of respect they have for our seniors. They have just proven the lack of respect for Canadians who have paid $500 billion more than was expected. They have just proven that the Liberals don't give a damn about the people. I will keep fighting. They're still showing incompetence, but hopefully the minister can at least confirm that there is a task force working on this. If not, the minister can remain seated. Mr. Speaker, the department has been working to modernize a decades-old system to process more applications for the decades to come. 7 billion seniors already receive their benefits on time, and the department is working on delayed benefits.
I have good news, Mr. Speaker. Following almost unprecedented levels of collaboration, Bill C-19 has received royal assent. As a result, over 12 million Canadians will now receive vital support to help pay for groceries and other essentials. Canadians are expecting us to once again put partisanship aside and pass the Budget Implementation Act. Can the Parliamentary Secretary update this House on how swift passage of the BIA will help unlock generational investments and build the strongest economy in the G7?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The member, in the short time that she's served as an MP, is making an outstanding contribution, particularly on economic issues. She is, after all, a tech entrepreneur at not one but two companies. She understands the importance of putting in place a foundation for the Canadian economy. C-19 did receive royal assent. 12 million Canadians will benefit. We can go a step further and put in place a foundation for the future of this country, and that is, of course, the budget. I've had the opportunity to serve for a few meetings now on the Federal Finance Committee. We're working well there. I hope Conservatives work with us to pass the budget without obstruction. I know they're up to it, and I know that the country needs that right now.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday at Finance Committee, the President of the Canada Infrastructure Bank stated that none of the funds lent to electric bus makers was written off, despite the bankruptcy of Lion Electric, which at least had $470 million allocated to it. The Strategic Innovation Fund also committed $50 million to Lion. That's a write-off. Export Development will not disclose how much they lost. Lion Electric was always a funding scheme that enabled insiders to profit from this government's transition narrative. Will a responsible minister provide some transparency and show taxpayers how much this scam has cost them?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Industry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question from my colleague opposite, who is a constructive member on these questions. Obviously, the situation that he refers to with a particular company has its issues, but we know more generally that investments in renewable technology work. We know that the future direction of both heavy vehicles and light vehicles is increasingly electric. That's why we're making the investments we're making. In terms of the question to the Canada Infrastructure Bank, I'll refer those questions to the bank.
The Honourable Member of Calgary Centre.
Well, I don't know how much proof they have to see that this actually isn't working, that money's going off the table and nothing's being accomplished. But the president of Lion Electric, Mark Bedard, sold $33 million of his shares prior to its bankruptcy in what is known as a pump-and-dump stock play. The Liberal government acted as a pump with millions of taxpayer dollars. Mr. Bedard and his friends then orchestrated the dump, and they walked away with millions. The minister did not include a share lockup with the grants. This is at least gross incompetence. It's financial crime, Mr. Speaker, the victims of which are Canadian taxpayers. Will any minister finally do the right thing and call in the RCMP?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I was at the Federal Finance Committee yesterday with the Honourable Member. He knows how the answer was put forward by Mr. Corey of the Infrastructure Bank. There's no deal with Lyon. What happened with Lyon in terms of the bankruptcy obviously is regrettable, certainly. But those buses that were intended to be procured are on the road under the operation of another company. The company was in fact sold. When it comes to the Infrastructure Bank, there is, and the founding act of the bank makes this clear, audits are required. He can look at those audits. The Auditor General is required to look at the Infrastructure Bank. Committee meetings can happen. The answers were clear.
For Edmonton West.
There's rampant use of illegal workers on federally funded infrastructure projects in Alberta. These traffic workers are being abused, robbed, and forced into unsafe work conditions, while union trades are shut out of the very jobs their taxes are funding. Over a year ago, I presented evidence to this government of this corruption, and yet no action. We tried to start a study in committee on the issue, but the Liberals blocked it. So why are the Liberals siding with corrupt companies using illegal traffic workers instead of standing with Alberta's building trades?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have lots of respect for all of those individuals that are out there building important infrastructure in Canada. We expect all employers to follow the rules to ensure that Canadians are safe day in and day out, and we will continue to work forward so that we can make sure that happens.
The Honourable Member for Honoré-Mercier.
Also have good news for you today. Bill C-14, the Bail and Sentencing Reform Act, after months of Conservative obstruction, is finally making its way through. Premiers, mayors, and law enforcement from across the country have called on Parliament to quickly pass this bill so that it could soon become the law of the land. Can the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Justice please share with Canadians the progress made on the Bail and Sentencing Reform Act?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I thank my colleague for the question. Mr. Speaker, our new Liberal Prime Minister was given a clear mandate by Canadians to tighten bail, strengthen sentences, and keep repeat violent offenders in jail where they belong. After months and months of obstruction by the Conservatives committee, holding Bill C-14 hostage, running down the clock by talking about cats and dogs, they finally relented last week and allowed the bill to move forward. Today, as the bill reaches its final stage at third reading, I urge the Conservatives to support this important piece of legislation, which will help keep our communities safe.
The Honourable Member for Côte-du-Sud, Rivière-du-Loup, Kataskamik-Témiscouata. Mr. Speaker, the College and Community Innovation Program supports research centres like Novica, Biopter, Optech, and La Pocatière. It lets businesses innovate and create jobs in rural areas, yet the budget for these research centres will be cut by 30%. They're already wasting $5 billion in the QRM cost overruns. They're leading to more debt and less results. It makes no sense. My question is a simple one. Why are the Liberals cutting research and innovation instead of cutting their unjustified expenses? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question. We recognize that colleges do vitally important research, and we recognize the importance of their ties to the business community. Intellectual property should remain in the hands of businesses and colleges. That is very important to us. We have heard certain claims about this program. We are currently speaking about this program with colleges.
Prime Minister says he's committed to pharmacare, but today only 3 provinces and 1 territory are covered. That's about 17% of all Canadians. A commitment to pharmacare should mean access for Canadians no matter where they live. Right now, access to medicine depends on your postal code. It's not nation building when you only give certain provinces and territories access to medicine. Will the Prime Minister commit today to expanding pharmacare to every province and territory that wants in, so Canadians aren't treated differently based on where they live?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. And I know the member works really hard for his community, and I appreciate the collaboration on this very matter. Our government will always protect Canada's healthcare system, including pharmacare and dental care. These are clear commitments, and we will always keep them. We're continuing to work with all provinces and territories to see how we can best support them to strengthen healthcare system, including on pharmacare. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Great job. The honourable member for Nunavut.
The First Nations Caring Society created Have a Heart Day. I attended an event held at the Meridian Theatres at Center Point. There were about 15 schools with around 700 students at this beautiful event. Originally started in 2012, this campaign has students write letters to the Prime Minister regarding the injustices towards Indigenous peoples. Will the Prime Minister honor these calls and finally act to give equity to Indigenous peoples in Canada?
Here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for her question and her passion for this issue. And it's
absolutely clear that we must continue to do everything we can to eliminate discrimination in Canada. That is why our ministers are meeting with stakeholders, they're meeting with partners, they're ensuring they get this right. We will continue to be focused on ensuring reconciliation moving forward, and I look forward to talking with the member opposite and explaining what the minister is doing over the next few weeks.
And that concludes question period for today. I see the Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons has raised on a point of order.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. There have been discussions among the parties, and if you seek it, I believe you'll find unanimous consent for the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on November 4th, 2025, be disposed of as follows. A, it be an instruction to the Standing Committee on Finance that, during its consideration of the bill, 1, the committee shall have the first priority for the use of House resources for committee meetings. 2, all amendments for clause-by-clause consideration of the bill be submitted to the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than noon on Thursday, February 19th, 2026. 3, the clerk of the committee write immediately to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee and any independent members to inform them of the study of the bill by the committee and to invite them to prepare and submit any proposed amendments to the bill, and that these amendments shall be deemed proposed during clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. 4, the chair of the committee write as promptly as possible to the chairs of the standing committees who have chosen to consider the subject matter of the provisions in the bill to inform them that any recommendations or suggested amendments be sent to the chair of the Standing Committee on Finance no later than noon, Thursday, February 19th, 2026. 5, the committee proceed to clause-by-clause consideration of the bill no later than Monday, February 23rd, 2026 at 11 o'clock a.m. 6, if the committee has not completed the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by 5 o'clock p.m. on Monday, February 23rd, 2026, all remaining amendments submitted to the committee shall be deemed moved. The chair shall put the question forthwith and successively without further debate on all remaining clauses and proposed amendments, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. 7, the chair shall report the bill to the House no later than Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. And then B, Mr. Speaker, the bill may be taken up at report stage at the next sitting following the completion of the provisions of subparagraph A7 of this order. And finally, C, the motion for third reading of the bill may be made in the same sitting during which the said bill has been concurred in at report stage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those opposed to the Honourable Minister moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried. Order. Daily routine of business. Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you, Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 32.2 and in accordance with the enhanced transparency requirements set out in the amended policy on tabling of treaties in Parliament, I am pleased to present to the House of Commons the Government of Canada's objectives for 3 negotiations, including a Canada-United Arab Emirates Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, a Canada-India Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and a Canada-Thailand Free Trade Agreement. The Government of Canada intends to commence these negotiations as soon as practicable, but in accordance with the policy, the commencement of negotiations will take place no earlier than 30 days from today. Thank you.
Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers.
Parliamentary committees. Presenting reports from committees. Our member for Etobicoke Centre.
Monsieur le Président, merci. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to present in both official languages the second report of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, entitled Certificate of Nomination of Kelly Burke to the position of Commissioner of Official Languages. The committee recommends this candidate to the position of Commissioner of Official Languages. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been discussions amongst the parties, and if you seek it, I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, Government Business Number 5, standing on the notice paper in the name of the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, be deemed adopted.
All those opposed, the Honourable Member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask for consent to adopt the following motion. That notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House during consideration of Bill C-14 today, the motion for third reading of the bill may be made in the same sitting following the concurrence at report stage of the said bill, and should third reading of the bill take place on Friday, February 13th, 2026, that government orders be extended for an hour on that day.
All those opposed to the Honourable Minister moving the motion will please say nay. There is not consent. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Pursuant to Standing Order 56.1, I move, seconded by the member for Winnipeg North, that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House during consideration of Bill C-14 today, the motion for third reading of the bill may be made in the same sitting following the concurrence at report stage of the said bill, and should third reading of the bill take place on Friday, February 13th, 2026, that government orders be extended for an hour on that day.
And seconded by Mr. Lamoureux, pursuant to Standing Order 56.1a, moves that, notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House during consideration of Bill C-14 today, the motion for third reading of the bill may be made in the same sitting following the concurrence at report stage of the said bill, and should third reading of the bill take place on Friday, February 13th, 2026, the government orders be extended for an hour on that day. Will those members participating in person who object to the motion please rise in their places? Fewer than 25 members having risen, the motion is adopted. Motions. Motion. Order. Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétition. The Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
Petition signed by Canadians. The petitioners. The Budget Implementation Act grants cabinet ministers sweeping powers to secretly exempt companies or individuals from federal laws, powers that were never disclosed or contemplated in the budget itself, and accordingly call on the government to remove these provisions and restore Canada's long-standing financial standards, transparency, and fiscal integrity.
Presenting petitions, Présentation de pétition, the Honourable Member for York Durham.
I'm presenting a petition today on behalf of Canadians concerned with two serious measures that the Liberals have brought forward. The first is powers in the Budget Implementation Act to secretly exempt individuals or companies from any federal law, and this was never disclosed in the budget discussion. And second is to adjust how Canada budgets for itself, going away from our long-standing fiscal traditions, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, the petitioners are calling on the government to do two things. First, remove any provision that allows cabinet ministers to exempt companies or individuals from federal law. And second, to restore our long-standing financial standards, our transparency, and our fiscal integrity.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
To present a petition from constituents from Edmonton West and across the country regarding the government's provisions in C-15 that would grant individual cabinet ministers sweeping powers to secretly exempt companies or individuals from federal laws. If anyone saw the Operations Committee the other day with the performance of the Treasury Board President, you would see why we cannot give such powers, sweeping powers, to ministers. The people signed asked that the government immediately remove any provisions that allow cabinet ministers to exempt companies or individuals from federal laws. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Courtney Alberni.
I rise today to table a certified petition on behalf of residents from Port Alberni on Vancouver Island who are calling on the federal government to fund more shore power at the Port Alberni loading docks. The petitioners describe living with relentless noise and air pollution caused by ships running diesel generators while they're berthed, sometimes continuously day and night for weeks at a time. This is not a minor convenience. It affects sleep, health, and quality of life for families living near the port. They cite that shore power is a proven solution. It allows ships to plug into the local electrical grid, eliminating the need for diesel generation while at berth. Petitioners also point out that shore power reduces emissions, lowers noise pollution, delivers long-term fuel savings, and is already in place in ports around the world, including the Port of Vancouver. And these petitioners are calling on the federal government to prioritize community health and environmental protection by funding shore power infrastructure at the Port Alberni loading docks. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Newmarket Aurora.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to table petitions from Canadians who are deeply concerned by the sweeping powers contained within Bill C-15. Petitioners warn that this provision would allow ministers to exempt any individual or corporation from any federal law except for the criminal code without full public or parliamentary scrutiny. They believe that this undermines the foundational principle of our democracy, that laws are made, amended and set aside by Parliament, not by unilateral executive decision. These Canadians support innovation and economic growth, but they are clear that flexibility must never come at the expense of transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. The petitioners therefore call on the Government of Canada to remove or significantly limit these sweeping powers, to ensure proper parliamentary oversight, to guarantee that no authority is placed above the law. Mr. Speaker, I am honoured to present these petitions on their behalf. Thank you.
Member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to present a petition that raises important concerns from Canadians about amendments made by the Liberal government and supported by the Bloc to Bill C-9. Petitioners fear that the change could criminalize passages of the Bible and other sacred writings. They believe that the state should not interfere in religious teachings or scriptures, and that doing so risks government overreach into matters of faith. At the core of this petition is a call to protect freedom of religion and freedom of expression as a fundamental right in Canada. They urge the government to ensure that Canadians can continue to read, to share, and to practice their faith without fear of being criminally charged. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member of St. Albert, Sturgeon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition. The petitioners note that brain cancer research is critically underfunded in Canada and that Canada is years behind the United States in approving new drugs and treatments. Accordingly, the petitioners call on the Government of Canada to increase funding for brain cancer research, work with the provinces and territories to ensure that drugs, medical devices, and new therapies are accessible to brain cancer patients nationwide, and to remove unnecessary red tape so brain cancer drugs can be approved expeditiously.
The honourable member of Calgary Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a petition that I'd like to table on behalf of Canadians who are concerned about Bill C-15 and the powers contained in this bill that would give the government the power to override any of their laws other than the criminal code at the discretion of a minister. The petitioners think that this is an unreasonable overreach of government power, that they could exempt an individual or a company from any law, including the Conflict of Interest Act. So the petitioners are concerned about this, and I'm happy to table their petition.
Presenting petitions, the honourable member for Stormont Dundas, Glengarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise on behalf of the people of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry to table a petition on behalf of residents of all faiths who've reached out with concerns and signed this petition about Bill C-9, specifically attempts by the Liberals and Bloc to ban religious teachings or texts of faith communities. They too believe that hate speech is wrong and should not be tolerated, but believe the Liberal government's efforts are misguided. I've heard from Christians, Muslims, and other religious organizations, and I appreciate that they have reached out with their concerns. They state the government has no place in the religious teaching or texts of faith communities, and I hear this in the community at large too. Preserving the right to free speech means defending it when others are threatened with losing that freedom too. The petitioners call on this House to protect religious freedom, the right to access, read, and share religious texts, and to limit government overreach in matters of faith. It should not be up to the government of the day to freely decide what beliefs are appropriate or not, and I'm glad to table this in the House of Commons today. Thank you.
Presenting petitions, présentation de pétition. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Permanent Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Is it agreed? Agreed and so ordered. Orders of the day. Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, government orders, government bills commons, resuming consideration at report stage of Bill C-14, Bail and Sentencing Reform Act, and on the motions in group number 1.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat, the honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as my first opportunity to rise in the aftermath of the terrible murders at Tumbler Ridge, I just want to add my voice to the chorus of sorrows. As a father, and I'm like every other parent, I'm sure all we could do as we watched that news was hug our own children a little bit closer and offer our prayers to the victims' families and the entire community for that devastating impact that they will face for the years ahead. Now, to the issue at hand, Canadians understand something that is too often lost in our political debate. When the justice system gets something wrong, the government just simply moves on, but ordinary people and their families continue to live with those consequences. Now, that is why Canadians expect Parliament, when shaping the law, to keep those people front and centre. Now, let me begin with something important, Mr. Speaker. Conservatives did not come to this bill looking for a fight. We came looking for fixes. We listened to victims and their families. Now, one of the most powerful moments at the Justice Committee did not come from legal experts. It came from a mother. Michelle Best, alongside her husband Ron, spoke about her daughter, Kelly Verway, a 28-year-old woman from Portage la Prairie, a bright light in our community. Her life was taken by an offender who was out on bail and already in breach of his conditions. Michelle did not come to Ottawa looking for sympathy. She came looking for answers and with solutions. And when Michelle described the day that she lost her daughter, the room fell rightfully silent. In that room, it became clear to everyone that this was not some theoretical debate. It was a mother reminding us that decisions have been made in this place that are lived out in our communities by real people. She asked a question that should stay with all of us. What good are reassurances if they do not protect anyone? She spoke about how often we hear about the rights of the accused and asked simply and powerfully, what about the rights of victims and their families? The cost of failure in the bail system is not measured in reports and statistics. It is measured in lives lost, in families living with grief, and in communities left wondering whether tragedy could have been prevented. Now, at committee, our Conservative MPs didn't just talk about the problems. We listened and we proposed solutions. Police officers, prosecutors, transit workers, and community advocates told us that the justice system was broken, with too many dangerous repeat offenders cycling through. And when they pointed out the gaps, we worked to make this bill stronger. Canadians are exhausted by this revolving door justice system, and they're just as tired of endless political games. They want results, and rightfully so. And we made real improvements to restore integrity to the bail system through amendments. One key amendment that we put forward prevents convicted serious offenders from acting as sureties. Bail supervision is meant to protect the public, not serve as simply a rubber stamp. Now, allowing those with serious criminal records to act as sureties is ridiculous, and our amendment ends this absurdity once and for all. We also strengthened detention rules by establishing a reverse onus for repeat serious violent offenders who commit new crimes while already on release. If someone is given a second chance and they use it to hurt people again, the priority must be public safety. They need to prove that they are no longer a risk, or they will remain behind bars. Because, Mr. Speaker, public safety is not negotiable. Period. Full stop. For too long, debates about bail reform have been driven by partial information. And it wasn't that long ago that we saw Liberal MPs and ministers defending the status quo as if it wasn't broken, that everything was okay. But the warning signs were there. But it took tragedy after tragedy after tragedy before they were prepared to admit that they had actually broken the system and it needed to be fixed. Now, to ensure this never happens again and to hold government accountable, our amendment mandates annual reporting on the bail system performance with transparent data on reoffending and compliance. Simply put, Canadians deserve to know whether these changes are making them safer, and Parliament needs facts, not assumptions, to keep improving the system. Finally, we supported measures that treat serious firearms and weapons offenses as violent crimes under youth justice law, because gun crime is violent crime, full stop. A person's age doesn't lessen the trauma inflicted on victims or the fear that it spreads in our communities. Now, these aren't just minor tweaks, they're important changes to make the bill stronger. Canadians also deserve honesty about what did not happen at committee. While Conservatives worked to strengthen this legislation, the Liberals repeatedly voted against measures that would have gone further to protect victims and communities. They voted against requiring consecutive sentences for repeat human traffickers. Well, let us be clear about what this means, Mr. Speaker. Human trafficking is one of the most heinous, exploitative, devastating crimes that exist in the criminal code. When someone commits that offense repeatedly, we believe penalties should reflect the gravity and the repetitive nature of that harm. Yet the Liberals rejected this proposal, choosing leniency where stronger consequences were absolutely warranted. They voted against making public safety the primary consideration of bail decisions. Think about that. What else could there be other than public safety as the primary consideration of bail decisions? At a time we have communities across the country raising concerns about repeat violent offenders cycling through the system, they refuse to enshrine a clear statement that community comes first. They also voted against mandatory detention in cases involving repeat serious offenders who reoffend while already on release. They voted against strengthening passport surrender requirements for high-risk accused individuals, even in reverse onus situations. And they voted against expanding ineligibility for house arrest for serious offenses such as human trafficking, robbery, and weapons trafficking. Now, Mr. Speaker, this leaves open the possibility that individuals convicted of major crimes could still serve their sentences in the comforts of their own home. Canadians watching this debate understand the difference. Conservatives fought for stronger protections because we knew what happens when warnings are ignored, while the Liberals chose half measures. Now, none of this debate exists in a vacuum, Mr. Speaker. Across the country, police chiefs and premiers have raised concerns about repeat offenders committing serious crimes while out on bail. The victims' families have spoken about preventable tragedies. Frontline police officers have called on Parliament to act before more people are hurt or killed. Bill C-14, as amended, moves in the right direction in several respects because of Conservative amendments. But it still reflects this government's failure to confront the consequences of policy choices that weakened confidence in the justice system. Public safety should not be a partisan issue. We should all agree that criminals belong behind bars. And that means recognizing when the system needs correction. Now, I believe in a justice system that must hold two truths at once. It must protect the rights of the accused, and it must protect the innocent. It must respect fairness, and it must ensure that safety for the communities that we all serve. Now, these goals are not mutually exclusive, Mr. Speaker. In fact, public confidence in the justice system depends on achieving both. When repeat violent offenders are released too easily, confidence erodes, and rightfully so. When serious crimes are met with insufficient consequences, deterrence weakens. And when victims feel that their safety ranks second to ideology, trust simply disappears. That is why Conservatives pushed for stronger measures, and that is why we will continue to push for improvements wherever and whenever possible. The amendments demonstrate what can happen when the government actually listens. Transit workers are better protected. Bail supervision is more credible. Repeat violent offenders face stronger scrutiny. And Canadians will finally receive clear reporting on how the bail system is performing. Those are real improvements, Mr. Speaker, but we must acknowledge that more work remains. I will never stop working to correct the past mistakes and to ensure that repeat offenders face real consequences for the harm that they cause, not just folks in my area, but across this country. Bill C-14 is stronger today because Conservative members fought to make it stronger, including the tireless work of my colleague from Brantford, Brant, Six Nations. But Canadians should also know this, Mr. Speaker. Where the government chose to not go further on repeat human traffickers, on mandatory detention for serious and repeat offenders, and on ending house arrest for major crimes, Conservatives will continue to press for change. Because this work does not just end with one bill. At the end of the day, The first responsibility of any government is the safety of its citizens. And that responsibility does not change with political convenience, and it does not disappear when this specific debate ends. It is the obligation of any government to keep its citizens safe. That is a responsibility that Conservatives will never stop fighting to uphold. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for St. Albert, Sturgeon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague mentioned consecutive sentencing. One thing that is completely missing from this bill is consecutive sentencing for murderers who commit multiple murders. In fact, the Liberals have refused to take any action in the face of the Bissonnette decision that struck down a reasonable law that gave judges the discretion to apply parole ineligibility periods on a consecutive basis to take into account each life lost. And not only that, the Liberals appear to oppose Brian's bill in memory of the late Brian Alisic, introduced by my colleague, the member for Edmonton-Griesbach, so that convicted murderers cannot apply for parole year after they have served their minimum sentence. What does that say about this government's approach when it comes to holding the most serious offenders, convicted murderers, accountable for their crimes?
Member for Portage Lisgar.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for a very important question. This is why we repeatedly say soft on crime. We've seen this for so many years from the Liberals, this deference to the accused and the convicted instead of listening to victims. When you get a chance to talk to somebody that's went through particularly the parole process or any of the court process, and you hear their stories, their frustrations with the lack of information available about releases on specific days and the inability to actually put forward victims' impact statements, it is devastating to listen to. And at the end of the day, it is Parliament that should reign supreme. When there are judges that make decisions that do not make sense, when we talk to our constituents about the fact that they don't make sense, we should be able to overrule and decide that serious repeat murderers deserve consecutive sentences and should stay behind bars for life, because life should mean life.
Questions and comments, Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Mr. Speaker, the member mentioned in his speech the delays that happened at committee, and I hope that he can elaborate a little bit more, because the Conservatives have constantly been trying to get Canadians to believe somehow that the government will table legislation and we would obstruct our own legislation. It absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. Bill C-9 first went to the Justice Committee and therefore it was under consideration. C-14 came after, and it was because of the filibuster on C-9 that delayed C-14. Is that not correct?
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Thank you. Well, not to get too far in the weeds, but the committee is the master of its own domain. The committee members could have decided that C-14 was the priority, because you know what? Canadians decided that C-14 was the priority. They have been demanding bail reform for 8 years after the initial changes by the same Liberal government that caused this entire mess. They decided to put a divisive issue, trying to remove the protections that are inherent to religious expression in C-9 forward instead of bail reform. Stop politicizing it. I'm glad we've finally been able to move forward, and they should also drop Bill C-9 while they're at it.
Questions, comments? The member for Nunavut.
I agree with the member in that amendments were needed. And they continue to be needed. And I wonder if he can express whether the Conservatives will support the amendments that were tabled by the MP for Saanich Gulf Islands,
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for the question. No, we've been focusing on strengthening the bill, not weakening the bill. And that's why Conservatives put forward so many positive amendments that thankfully some of which were entertained are now going to become law should this bill pass through the Senate. But we are going to leave aside bills that are going to make the priority of convicted criminals above that of victims.
Questions and comments? A very brief question to the Honourable Secretary of State for Combating Crime.
Mr. Speaker, is it true that we just heard the members say that C-9 is unnecessary? That is our hate crime legislation. Worshippers today in Canada have felt intimidated and threatened going to their place of worship. We're trying to protect Canadians from that threat and that fear of their life. The Jewish community has been asking for this bill for a long time, Mr. Speaker, and it seems like the member doesn't care.
The member for Portage Lisgar.
The amendments to remove the freedom of religious expression that the Liberals cooked up with the Bloc Québécois, that I have received more emails, phone calls, and stops in grocery stores than I ever have on any other issue, is the problem. Of course, acts of hate are the problem. We should be having a country where our prosecutors and our police actually act on the laws that we have to protect worshippers of all faiths and all Canadians, and it's only been the last 10 years where we've seen this rapid rise in every type of crime, including hate crimes, under this Liberal government.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. Is the House ready for the question? The question is on motion 2. A vote on this motion also applies to motions numbers 3 to 9. Madame May.
Ms. May, seconded by Ms. Iglout, moved that Bill C-14 be amended by deleting Clause 43.
Si un député participant en
If a member participating in person wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair.
Order. I would like to make a brief statement for the benefit of all members. The member in whose name the report stage motions is standing is not in a position to indicate that they should be adopted. No other members have indicated that they should be either adopted or negatived. Our own practice is silent as to what to do in such a situation. However, the issue has come up in the British House of Commons. Erskine May, 25th edition, in paragraph 20.56 states the following. When, on a question being put, no member has said either aye or no, the Deputy Speaker has declared the question negatived. Comme la Chambre se trouve dans...
As the House finds itself in a similar situation today, this precedent would reject the motion. I'd like to thank the members for the attention to this matter.
Order. Madame Sahota.
Ms. Sahota, for Mr. Fraser, seconded by Mr. Sarai, moves that Bill C-14, an act to amend the Criminal Code, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and the National Defence Act, bail and sentencing, as amended, be concurred in at report stage.
Debate. Oh, sorry. Pursuant to made earlier today, the House will now proceed to the consideration.
Put the question on the
okay.
Motion.
Order. If a member participating in person wishes the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I would now invite them to indicate it to the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, would carry it on division, please.
On division? Agreed. I therefore declare the motion carried on division. When shall the bill be read a third time? Right now. Ms. Sahota for Mr. Fraser, seconded by Mr. Sarai, moves that Bill C-14, an act to amend the Criminal Code, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and the National Defence Act, bail and sentencing, be now read a third time and do pass. Debate. And the Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes is rising on a point of order.
Speaker, I'm rising to contribute to the point of order raised by the member for Saanich Gulf Islands concerning the continued placement of Bill C-2, the so-called Strong Borders Act, on the order paper. As you and the whole House well know, Bill C-2 was a significant overreach.
I'll invite the member to make his interjection. I think, then we'll carry on after the.
Yeah. As the whole House knows, Speaker, and its business will continue in a mere moment's time, Bill C-2 was a significant overreach. If passed in its current form, Bill C-2 would require law-abiding Canadians to lose important liberties to pay for the Liberals' failures on borders and immigration. The government, realizing the passage of C-2 would be neither swift nor assured, went back to the drawing board and repackaged the less contentious aspects into new legislation, Bill C-12, the C-2 redo. However, the government has since publicly indicated that the orphaned portions of C-2 not only remain Liberal policy, but also continue to be part of its parliamentary agenda as is. I share that member's view that Bill C-2 in its current form cannot proceed further in the House by virtue of the same question rule. House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 4th edition, explains this practice at paragraphs 12.89 and 12.90. Quote, a decision once made cannot be questioned again, but must stand as the judgment of the House. Thus, if a bill or motion is rejected or adopted, it cannot be revived in the same session. This is to prevent the time of the House being used in the discussion of motions of the same nature with the possibility of contradictory decisions being arrived at in the course of the same session. This rule is dependent upon the principle which forbids the same question from being decided in the House twice within the same session. Although two similar or identical motions or bills may appear in the notice paper, only one motion or one bill may be proceeded with. Thus, if a decision is taken by the House on the first bill, for example, to defeat the bill or advance it through a stage in the legislative process, then the other similar or identical bill may not be proceeded with. End quote. In the present case, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-12 would be what is described as the first bill. In Janssen LeBlanc's explanation, because it had been adopted at second reading back on October 23rd, while Bill C-2 would be the Bill C-2 would be the other bill described in that passage and therefore cannot now proceed. Bills C-12 and C-2 are, in my view, very similar in substance. Indeed, Bill C-12 is effectively a copy and paste of 11 of the 16 parts of Bill C-2 plus one of its two schedules, as the member enumerated in her argument. Setting aside the marketing-oriented short titles of the two bills, C-12 is composed of 136 of the 197 clauses found in Bill C-2, or 69% of its clauses, adjusted only insofar as necessary to reflect the passage of time between the introduction of the two bills. As such, if the House is called upon to vote on Bill C-2, it would be called upon to vote again for second reading of many legislative measures which it had already approved, but it might yield a different result. The Chair has had multiple opportunities during the previous two parliaments to rule on these issues after many Conservative private members' bills had been poached by the government as its own legislation. While we're happy to see a good idea get adopted, often it gets thrown into an omnibus budget implementation bill, buried, if you will. I would refer you, for example, to rulings of the following. Mr. Speaker Rhoda, on February 18th, 2021, at page 4,256 of the debates, and then Deputy Speaker on May 11th, 2022, at page 5,123 of the debates. Mr. Speaker Rhoda on June 6, 2022, at page 6,140 of the debates. Mr. Speaker Rhoda on September 20th, 2022, at page 7,341 of the debates. And your immediate predecessor on November 29, 2023, at page 19,211 of the debates, and again on December 12, 2023, at page 19,978 of the debates. And then finally, the then Deputy Speaker on June 7th, 2024, at page 24,627 of the debates. In the May 20 22 ruling, the chair held that Bill C-250, the private member's bill proposed by my colleague, the honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswood, could not be debated and would be rendered pending following the second reading of Bill C-19, a budget implementation bill which contained clauses similar to my friend's bill because, quote, the House should not face a situation where the same question can be cited twice within the same session unless the House's intention is to rescind or revoke the decision, end quote. In June 2024, the chair again fashioned a similar procedure which would have seen the vote at third reading of another private member's bill, Bill C-323, held in abeyance if necessary until the budget implementation bill, Bill C-59, had completed its course through Parliament. This approach to placing pieces of legislation on hold after a similar bill has made progress is not brand new practice. I'd refer you to the ruling of Mr. Speaker Michener, who said on March 13, 1959, at page 238 of the journals, in another situation concerning nearly identical pieces of legislation, quote, the House is not going to occupy itself on two separate occasions under two separate headings with exactly the same business. This would not be reasonable, and I can find no support or authority for following such a course. Thus, I have come to the conclusion that this bill must stand, as well as the other bill, in these same terms, or at least in terms of exactly the same purpose, until the bill, which was first moved, has been disposed of, either by being withdrawn, which would open the door for one of these other bills to proceed, or by way of being approved, which would automatically dispose of these bills, because the House would not vote on the same subject matter any more than it would debate the same subject matter twice, end quote. Speaker, to sum up, one of my most brief points of order ever, 69% of the content of Bill C-2 is replicated in Bill C-12, making the two bills substantively similar. The House has since passed Bill C-12 at third reading, in another example of the wonderful collaboration that's found in this place, and it is working its way through the procedures of the other place. Because the two bills are substantively similar, the same question rule precludes the House from voting on the same matter twice, and therefore, Bill C-2 must be placed in abeyance while Bill C-12 remains before Parliament. And if Bill C-12 receives the royal assent, Bill C-2 then must be discharged, dropped from the order paper. I'll note, Mr. Speaker, all of the records were from nearly the last 100 years. Again, a departure from my usual practice in raising the precedences that guide the decisions of the chair. Thank you very much.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and certainly the matter will be taken under the consideration of the chair. Resuming debate. Reprise du débat. Is the House ready for the question? The question is as follows. Mr. Fraser, seconded by Mr. Sarai, moved that Bill C-14, an act to amend the Criminal Code, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and the National Defence Act, Bail and Sentencing, be now read a third time and do pass. If a member participating in person wishes the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The Honourable Parliament Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we request that it be carried on division, please.
Is it agreed? Agreed. I therefore declare the motion carried on division.
Third reading of this bill, troisième lecture de ce projet de loi.
The Parliament Secretary is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suspected if you canvassed the House, you'd find unanimous consent to call at 1:30 at this point, so we could be in private mayor's hour.
Is it agreed? Agreed and so ordered. It being 1:30, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business, resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-244, the Clean Coasts Act, standing in the name of Mr. Weiler.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, l'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, given that this is my first opportunity to rise in the House today, and it's the last day before February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, I would like to take a moment to mark Valentine's Day. It's an important day for many people. Certainly, I count myself among those people. I would like to greet my beloved partner, as well as I'd also like to say hi to my 3 children, and I'd like to wish a happy Valentine's Day to everyone here in this house. Think of all of our friends and loved ones. I would also note that today is one of those rare days when I don't get a knee-jerk negative reaction from the color red. I would also like to take advantage of this day to talk about another one of my loves, the proud Quebec nation. I'm sure that my partner won't mind. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are discussing Bill C-244, a private member's bill tabled by the member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, which is a long riding name. It's a riding found in British Columbia. The member who moved the bill is the chair of the Fisheries and Oceans Committee, and I would imagine that his committee role got him interested in the topics found in the bill. Given the name of the riding, I imagine it is a seaside riding, so I'm sure that has also awakened his interest. The bill focuses on abandoned ships, or ghost ships. There's already legislation on this, passed in 2019. But that bill, the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act, would be amended by this private member's bill. What would the bill do? It would mandate the Department of Transport and Fisheries and Oceans to set up a framework to protect marine areas by dealing with this ghost ship problem. Ghost ships represent a dangerous problem up and down our coasts. The bill, Mr. Speaker, seems to be in the public interest. And to summarize the bill quickly, the main point is found in Clause 3, which would amend the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act by adding, after Section 34, a new section, 34.1, which would prohibit the transfer of ownership to a person if the owner knows that the person lacks the ability, resources, or intent to maintain, operate, or dispose of the vessel in a manner that prevents it from being wrecked, abandoned, or hazardous. So, if anyone is transferring ownership of a vessel, they need to make sure that the person who receives it will take care of it instead of turning it into a new wreck. That's not negative. In fact, I am very much in favor of this measure. But in and of itself, it will not address the problem of wrecks. At the same time, we can say nothing negative about this initiative. We commend the member for raising it, and we note that the Bloc Québécois will be voting in favor of C-244. I hope the bill will be studied in committee. There, it can be improved further, potentially, because it does, after all, deal with a very important topic. And at this point, I will also note that the topic of abandoned vessels was studied at the Fisheries and Oceans Committee. On October 22nd, the committee sent a number of these recommendations to the House. This gives me hope that good work can be done in committee. I hope that the committee will be able to draw from its own recommendations as it works to improve the bill. The report from the Fisheries and Oceans Committee made a number of salient points. They noted it can be difficult to track down the owner of a given vessel. The report also dealt with the issue of private docks, which also presents difficulties. There are examples of the problems caused by abandoned ships in various ridings, and the committee also talked about cost reduction because it costs a lot of money to get rid of wrecks. This is not something that is done for free. It's actually a very costly process. Just as an example of the bureaucracy, one member from a riding not too far from my own in the Beauharnois region dealt with one boat that was abandoned in Lac St. Louis for 7 years. 7 years with an abandoned boat floating around in the lake. And everyone basically shrugged their shoulders about it. There's a sort of apathy from the part of the government. In the bloc, we often talk about the federal government overstepping its jurisdiction, but we also see that they occasionally do nothing about issues that are very much within their jurisdiction. Leaving a boat in a lake for 7 years is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. It's another example of the poor governance from this government. And it's not just this government, because between 2011 and 2018, the time the boat was in the water, we saw a Conservative government and a Liberal government, and despite this, the needle didn't move. The situation was outrageous, according to my colleague from Beauharnois, because an abandoned boat can lead to all sorts of problems. It might leak contaminants into the water, rust, for example. Teenagers or homeless people might explore the boat and end up getting injured. We know that an abandoned vessel is a curious thing that could get certain people interested. There are even shipwrecks out there that have become tourist attractions. For example, in the North Shore, and people willingly choose to see their interiors. But that does not change the fact that abandoned vessels represent a major environmental hazard. We know that the government is trying to reduce plastic pollution. Plastic is all over the place in the oceans. They've also proposed a net zero objective for climate emissions. Perhaps they should also set out a new objective, a zero wrecks initiative. We cannot have this scourge of abandoned boats being left all over our waterways and bodies of water. The lack of vision is leading to a lack of action, as we often see with this government. In coastal regions, people need fishing boats to drive the economy and to secure food. Marine navigation is essential to local community vitality, but we do need to have a discussion about what happens to boats at the end of their useful lives. We cannot simply leave them to rot. It leaks contaminants into our environment, which often find their way into the human bodies. We've seen shocking images already of plastic pollution in the oceans. There's also an accumulation of boats in our lakes and rivers. This undermines an essential piece of our natural wealth and prevents us from using it over the long term. We need to protect our society as well as nature and biodiversity. Mr. Speaker, we often see government inaction on this file. We find this inaction shocking. With this in mind, we are glad to see that there is one member in the governing party who is trying to move the needle and start a discussion. That's a good thing. Discussion leads to solutions, or at the very least, it leads to more awareness. I would ask everyone to think about this important issue and come up ways we can do more to solve it. Members should also think about examples like we have seen in the Magdalen Islands. I have to cut off the honourable member.
Please do that. The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I am pleased to speak as the Member of Parliament for Victoria in support of the Clean Coast Act, put forward by my colleague, the Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country. Those of us who live in and represent coastal communities know that the ocean is our lifeline, but also our responsibility. Ceux d'entre nous qui vivent dans les communautés.
Many people live in coastal communities, and those of us in those regions know that coasts are our life buoy and our responsibility.
Even before being elected to this House, I heard from people in my community daily about the negative effects of derelict vessels in our waterways. After every storm, we see more and more vessels that have fallen into disrepair and have been abandoned by irresponsible owners for others to deal with. These so-called dead boats don't just serve as an eyesore for our community. They pose serious safety and environmental risks, often with no one around to be held accountable. There is not one perfect solution to this issue, but I commend my colleague for putting forward Bill C-244, which takes important steps in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, this bill targets the irresponsible transfer of vessel ownership. In Victoria, I hear of these instances far too often. An owner sells a rotting hull for $1, sometimes less, to somebody they know cannot maintain it, effectively washing their hands of the environmental liability of responsibly disposing of that vessel. By prohibiting the transfer of vessels to those who lack the resources or the intent to actually maintain them, we will help stop the cycle of abandoned and wrecked vessels before they end up on our beaches and in our marinas. We are demanding accountability at the point of sale, not just when the taxpayer is forced to foot the bill for a cleanup or removal of a derelict vessel, or rely simply on the goodwill of local organizations and hardworking volunteers. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the often thankless work by organizations in my riding, such as the Cadborough Bay Dead Boat Society, the Royal Victoria Yacht Club, the Veins of Life Watershed Society, and the Dead Boats Disposal Society, as well as others who have given their time and energy to address this issue, often taking on personal costs and liability. I would also like to thank the Canadian Coast Guard, Western Region, and Transport Canada for their role in environmental response, but acknowledge that they do not have the capacity or the mandate to single-handedly shoulder this burden. And, as always, we also wish to express our thanks and our appreciation to the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of Southern Vancouver.
Order. I'll just ask the member for pause just a second. I have a point of order from the honourable member from Edmonton West.
Well, I find the commentary interesting. I cannot hear it because of constant crackling. I think perhaps he has an issue with his mic or computer. Perhaps we can move on to the next speaker while he fixes his IT issues.
What I'll do is I'll just invite the honourable member for Victoria to perhaps move the microphone just slightly out from his face, and hopefully that might solve the issue. Of course, we do need interpretation to be able to function correctly for this House to operate. So we'll see if that works, and I'll ask the member to resume from where he left off, and if there's more challenges, we'll address that when it comes. So I'll invite the member from Victoria to resume where he left off.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, we also wish to express our thanks and our appreciation to the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of Southern Vancouver Island, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and WSÁNEĆ nations, whose stewardship and care for these lands and waters since time immemorial sets a high bar for our communities and our governments to uphold today.
Order. And I'm getting word that the interpreters cannot interpret the sound due to the sound quality.
I was hearing the interpretation earlier, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not seeing any technical issues on this side.
I'm just going to ask the member to pause for just a second. I'm going to consult the table. So, to the honourable member from Victoria, what we're going to have an IT ambassador reach out to you to hopefully remedy the situation. We will then return to the remainder, the balance of the honourable member's intervention, hopefully later in the hour. But until then, we will move on to the next person in the rotation, which is the honourable member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm here to offer my interventions on Bill C-244, an act to amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999 and the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazard Vessels Act. So this bill proposes that it will strengthen Canada's ability to address abandoned, derelict and hazardous vessels, close the gaps in the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act by expanding liability for owners who cause or allow vessels to become hazards, clarifies that it's illegal not only to dispose of pollutants, but also to allow someone else to do so, tightens rules on the transfer of ownership, preventing owners from offloading vessels into vehicles or onto individuals who cannot maintain or safely dispose of them, reduces long-term marine environmental risks, oil leaks, contamination, wrecked debris, and protects public, environmental, and navigational safety. Ensures owners can be held liable where they are reckless in transferring a vessel to an unqualified buyer, and encourages proactive prevention, consistent enforcement, and polluter pays principles. I do have some concerns, though, Mr. Speaker, with this bill as drafted, specifically around the transfer of ownership amendment, because it uses broad and open-ended language in stating that, quote, if the owner knows that or is reckless as to whether the person lacks the ability, resources, or intent, end quote, which would create legal uncertainty and potentially unfairly impact individuals accused of reckless vessel ownership transfers. So where my concerns lie, Mr. Speaker, is how could a seller guarantee or truthfully know the purchaser's intent and means? How will DFO and or the courts deal with the ambiguities, litigation costs, burden of proof issues? So this is something I'm hoping that the drafter, the member that's put this bill forward, can maybe provide some clarity even during debate today, or that should this bill get to committee can be addressed with an amendment. I would note the following, that under the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act, enacted in 2019 under the Canada Oceans Protection Plan, it is designed to prevent vessel abandonment and hold owners accountable for the environmental and safety risks posed by their vessels. Under the same act, it's illegal to abandon a vessel in Canadian waters on federal property, and owners are responsible for the costs to remove, repair, or mitigation. The Canadian Coast Guard and Transport Canada have the authority to order owners to take action, and if owners fail to comply, the government can intervene and recover those costs. The Act also establishes significant penalties, including fines and potential imprisonment, and supports a national inventory of wrecked, abandoned, or hazardous vessels to monitor and manage the issue. Overall, the Act does hold the owner responsible for vessel-related hazards to owners. I know I can speak on behalf of Conservatives that we support the Wrecked and Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act in the 42nd Parliament and emphasize the belief that individuals should be responsible for their actions and their property. I want to lay out now, Mr. Speaker, in my speech, why this is so important in my riding of Bruce Grey Owen Sound. So in the community of Stokes Bay, I've been dealing with this issue for a couple of years now. We've had a fishing vessel sank at a government dock, and it released, unfortunately, diesel and pollutants into the harbor. The Coast Guard did deploy contaminant booms and conducted a helicopter overflight to monitor the spill. The vessel was seen afloat on September 14th. The contaminants were contained with provincial assistance, and despite the federal response, the vessel was then refloated, but again left at the dock. That same vessel sank again in the same location a couple months later. Coast Guard again deployed environmental response equipment. The vessel was refloated, towed to Southampton, just outside my riding, and dry docked. However, the recovery had to remove approximately 25,000 liters of pollutants out of the water. The Ontario Provincial Police reported no evidence of criminal activity related to the sinking. However, community frustration increased due to the inaction between the first sinking and the second sinking. Even more recently, in March of 2025, at another location in Howdenvale, a vessel a fishing boat was reported sinking at, again, a federal government dock, releasing diesel fuel into the water. Local residents indicated the vessel had been neglected for many years by its owner. Fortunately, the diesel pollution was contained through a joint effort by the boat owner, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the NAWASH, one of my First Nations Fisheries Assessment Program team. The vessel was then pulled ashore, ending the immediate environmental risk. But again, this incident demonstrates the hazarded or neglected vessels are not isolated just to one area in my community, and similar issues are unfortunately occurring across multiple federally operated docks in my riding. Here's the challenge for the constituents and what the community's, reporting. They stated they reported the second sinking in real time with photos. They asked why the vessel was allowed to remain after the first sinking, questioned the lack of clear accountability. A local business owner emphasized that the community's sheltered Mark Harbor that is having trouble now being used by transient boaters seeking refuge during storms when these vessels are left at the docks. Historically, this harbor, in particular in Stokes Bay, has a shared responsibility between the Indigenous commercial fishers and recreational boaters. However, there's multiple fishing tugs now have been occupying the dock, 3 unmoved for years, which again limit access for everybody. And this dock congestion described as an eyesore, which harms tourism, recreation, and business in the local community. Basically, quote, here's what the residents are saying, quote, someone needs to do something. This cannot keep happening, unquote. And many note that this vehicle, or this vessel that now has fortunately been removed, had sunk 5 years even previous to the incident in 2024, so this has been an ongoing concern. So sort of in summary then, Mr. Speaker, of the local impacts, cottage bookings end up being canceled, tourism is decline, boaters and swimmers avoid these federally operated harbors. After the contamination, local businesses, guides, and operators lose income during peak season. Wildlife and nearshore habitat concerns are increased. Municipal staff are forced to take on responsibilities despite this being a federal jurisdiction. Widespread communication frustration over these unclear federal responsibilities. And the most common question that I get, who is responsible and why wasn't it removed after these first spills? It's impacting transient boating traffic and marine tourism, lost revenue for local small businesses and operators, long-term risk to property values, insurability and economic reputation, heightened anxiety over water safety and environmental contamination. Tension is increased due to the limited dock access. And again, the residents feel that they have no federal mechanisms available to trigger these vessel removals. Again, there's overlap here that creates confusion between the Coast Guard, Transport Canada, and DFO. And they really feel that the federal response is reactive instead of proactive, allowing this environmental harm to repeat. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I just want to offer that Bill C-244's goal of reducing barriers must also apply to federal operations. It must shift from a reactive cleanup to proactive prevention. The polluter, not the public, must pay, and communities like Stokes Bay and my riding of Bruce Grey-Owen Sound deserve federal systems that work for the first time. As our Conservative Party of Canada policy declaration clearly states, that the government has an obligation to establish and enforce safety standards for local and foreign vessels which operate in Canadian waters for the well-being of workers as well as the environment, and that the Conservative Party stands by its commitment to facilitate rehabilitation or demolition of abandoned and derelict vessels. Mr. Speaker, I believe the intent of this bill, or the member proposing Bill C-244, is absolutely in the right direction in addressing derelict abandoned vessels. I'm not sure as drafted it will achieve this, but I look forward to hearing the continued debate, and as I said, if this bill does get to committee, that amendments can be made that will make this bill even stronger to address this important issue, not only to my riding of Bruce Grey-Owen Sound, but across Canada at all our water, whether it be lakes, oceans, etc. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate. Reprise du débat, the honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise today to speak to Bill C-244, which is a bill about delivering real accountability and taking a proactive approach to prevent marine pollution and abandoned vessels. And Mr. Speaker, I'd first like to thank my colleague, the MP for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky, for bringing this bill forward. It's great leadership. The first thing this bill does, Mr. Speaker, is it amends the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to make it clear that when pollution ends up in our oceans, the owner or operator of that vessel is responsible, even when that pollution results from negligence, poor maintenance, or foreseeable failure, not only when the intent can be proven. So secondly, it amends the Wrecked, Abandoned, or Hazardous Vessels Act to stop vessel owners from offloading end-of-life boats onto the people they know don't have the means to maintain or safely dispose of them. It closes the loophole that allows responsibility to be transferred on paper while the pollution risk remains in the water. These two changes are practical. They respond directly to what coastal communities live with every day. From the perspective of a coastal riding, where I live, the problem this bill addresses is not occasional, it's structural. Our system too often intervenes only after damage has already been done. We mobilize the Coast Guard once fuel is already in the water. We rely on volunteers once debris is already on our coast, especially Indigenous Guardian programs. We scramble for funding once a vessel is already sunk. That approach costs more, harms ecosystems, and downloads responsibility onto communities that didn't cause this problem. So Bill C-244 moves us towards a prevention-first approach. This bill strengthens accountability when pollution results from negligence, poor maintenance, or foreseeable failure, not only when intent can be proven. So anyone who works around these harbors knows that some of the most damaging pollution comes from aging vessels or deferred maintenance and weak oversight. The ecological harm is the same whether a spill is deliberate or the same as neglect. So if we want to change behavior, we have to change incentives, and clear liability rules encourage better maintenance, safety planning, and proper end-of-life management. When the costs of failure are real, prevention becomes cheaper than cleanup. So this bill also addresses a pattern coastal communities see repeatedly: responsibility being passed along until no one is left holding it. Vessels nearing the end of their useful life are transferred, deteriorate, and eventually sink. And the community that then inherits that problem, they deal with the navigational hazard and the cleanup bill, and that's not just an individual failure, it's a huge policy failure, which this bill will address. It's also important to be honest about why some of these transfers happen. Many vessel owners want to avoid the cost of properly deconstruction of that vessel or recycling a boat at the end of its life, rather than pay for responsible disposal. Some of them offload these vessels cheap or literally free, and those vessels are often taken by vulnerable people who are desperate. A lot of people take these vessels just for housing, Mr. Speaker, and I saw this firsthand in Tofino, where I lived for almost 25 years. With limited affordable housing, people ended up, and they still live on aging vessels tied to makeshift moorages. Those vessels are often not seaworthy, and the people living on them often don't have the resources to maintain or even safely dispose of them. So the result is predictable. The vessel deteriorates, pollution increases, and when it finally sinks, the costs fall on the community. This bill helps close the loophole that allows responsibility to be pushed onto the most vulnerable. This is not about blaming people who are struggling to find housing. It's about ensuring that those who profit from vessels and control their disposal can't avoid and evade responsibility by passing that problem down the line to someone who really has no realistic ability to manage those risks. Marine pollution is also an economic issue. It undermines fisheries, tourism, and working waterfronts. Clean waters are the foundation of coastal communities. Every abandoned vessel that sinks in a harbor imposes costs on local governments, First Nations taxpayers. Strong rules aren't anti-economic, they're actually pro-community and pro-future. And we know how sacred wild Pacific salmon is, Mr. Speaker. This is protecting wild Pacific salmon as well. So for these reasons, the NDP supports this bill at second reading and improves accountability and strengthens prevention, which are things that we've been a long time calling for, and it moves us in the right direction. But Mr. Speaker, this bill also highlights how much further the federal government still needs to go. Even with the stronger liability rules, as this Transportation Safety Board has rightly pointed out in the past, Canada still has no coordinated response system for dealing with shipping container spills and marine debris incidents. We have seen the consequences of that gap again and again, and I would like to see this addressed. Containers were lost from the henge in Seattle, as you know, in 2016. More than 100 containers fell from the Zim Kingston just a few years ago, and more recently, a large barge fell off, off of Bella Coola, nearly went down with a full load. Each time, First Nations and coastal communities were left to respond. Volunteers cleaned debris off of beaches, and local governments and Indigenous guardians dealt with the long-term impacts to ecosystems, fisheries, and local economies. The lack of a coordinated response leaves our coast exposed incident after incident, and the Zim Kingston spill also exposed a deeper accountability gap, that under current rules, the owner of the Zim Kingston can only be held liable for damages and cleanup costs for up to 6 years. So similar to concerns outlined in this bill from the date of the incident. So, you know, the debris from that spill continues to wash up on our shores and will for decades, Mr. Speaker, and microplastics and polystyrene fragments will persist in the marine environment long after that liability clock runs out. Pollution doesn't end when a legal timeline expires. Communities and ecosystems live with the consequences long after corporate liability has ended, and this is why relying on after-the-fact liability alone is not enough. We need preparedness, prevention, and a standing response system that is ready before the next spill happens, not improvised afterward. Coastal and Indigenous communities keep telling Ottawa the same thing. They're tired of holding the bag when debris hits their shores. A coordinated response system backed by industry through mechanisms like an ecosystem service fee on cargo units and on ships would ensure that the costs of protecting our coasts are not downloaded onto communities and volunteers alone. And any coordinated marine pollution response would be incomplete without reinstating the Ghost Gear Fund. It was one of the most important conservation initiatives in Canadian history, tackling up to 800,000 annual tons of abandoned, lost or discarded fishing gear that is amongst the deadliest sources of plastic pollution. I think of Ocean Legacy Foundation. I think of the Coastal Restoration Society in my riding, many different groups that did that work, Surfrider, Pacific Rim. This bill, you know, it might strengthen legal liability standards against marine pollution, but a multi-year permanent Ghost Gear Fund focused on prevention and rapid response remains essential to keeping our coast clean. And this brings me to another piece of the prevention puzzle that Bill C-244 points towards, but doesn't fully solve. What happens to vessels at the end of life? So if we're serious about stopping abandoned and derelict vessels from becoming pollution hazards, Canada needs a responsible ship recycling system here at home. Too many Canadian vessels are sold off, exported to jurisdictions with weaker standards, or left to deteriorate in our waters until they become hazardous waste. That is environmental negligence and economic leakage. We lose the jobs, we lose the materials, and communities inherit the pollution. Canadian vessels should be recycled here in Canada to high environmental and labour standards that requires domestic ship recycling infrastructure, clear federal guidelines and investment in facilities and training so vessels can be dismantled safely and responsibly. This is not only an environmental necessity, it's an economic opportunity to create good local jobs in coastal communities while preventing pollution before it happens. In Port Alberni, in my riding, the Ship Recycling Leadership Group that I've been working on has brought together local governments, labour, environmental organizations, industry, and Indigenous partners to develop a model for responsible ship recycling. A core guiding principle of that group is that ship recycling must be grounded in Indigenous leadership, decision-making authority, and consent. Responsible ship recycling can't be imposed on communities, and it must be done with Indigenous nations as true partners, with leadership at the table, real decision-making authority, and free, prior, and informed consent. This is the standard Canada should be embedding in any national ship recycling framework. So Bill C-244 strengthens accountability when vessels are abandoned or cause pollution. That is necessary. But if we want to stop the problem at its source, we must also build the end-of-life solutions that make responsible disposal the easy, affordable way for vessel owners. And so, yes, this Parliament should support Bill C-244. It closes loopholes and strengthens prevention But again, the government must act on container spills, marine debris, implementation of the Transportation Safety Board's recommendations, and invest in Canadian ship recycling capacity with strong federal standards. If we fail to do the full job, we will keep paying more to clean up pollution after the fact instead of preventing it at the source. Coastal communities deserve better than that. Again, I want to thank my colleague, the MP for West Vancouver Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky, for bringing this bill forward. I look forward to working with him on these additional concerns and solutions, from marine debris and ship and container spills to building responsible ship recycling capacity here in Canada. New Democrats will be supporting this bill and will continue to push the government to do the full job of protecting our coasts, our communities, and the waters we depend on. Thank you.
Resuming debate, I will now invite the Honourable Member for Victoria to resume his comments, and he'll have about 7 minutes to finalize his comments. The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate the opportunity to continue. I just wanted to start again by expressing the thanks and appreciation that everybody in my community has to the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of southern Vancouver Island, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic nations, whose stewardship and care for the lands and waters that we live on today since time immemorial sets a high bar for our governments and communities to achieve today. Mr. Speaker, the bill before us proposes important amendments to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to ensure that no person or ship can allow the disposal of substances in our waters. This is about proactive stewardship. It ensures that negligence is no longer a legal defense for polluting our marine ecosystems. The Salish Sea, which surrounds my region and my riding, is an intricate ecosystem, home to species such as the southern resident killer whale and the Chinook salmon. These species are put at risk when pollutants are introduced in our waterways, and we have a duty to act. The Clean Coast Act is a common-sense preventative measure. It protects our blue economy, saves millions in future salvage costs, and honors our commitment to maintaining the health, beauty, and accessibility of the BC coast and all of Canada's coasts for everyone. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely thank my colleague, the Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, for bringing this motion, or this bill rather, forward. And I urge all members of this House to support this important piece of legislation to keep our coasts clean, to keep owners accountable, and to keep our oceans thriving. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Debate. Reprise de débat. The Honourable Member for Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak to Bill C-244, an act to amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and the Wrecked, Abandoned, or Hazardous Vessels Act. I want to thank the sponsor of this bill for bringing forward an issue that coastal, river, and lakeside communities across Canada have been raising for years. It's definitely on the right path. This is a huge problem throughout Canada, throughout the interior of British Columbia that I represent, and also in our beautiful lakes, such as Okanagan Lake, where abandoned vessels have caused environmental chaos. Abandoned and derelict vessels, commonly referred to as DAVs, are a growing and serious threat to our ecosystems, our fisheries, our aquatic habitats, and to the Canadians who depend on them. These vessels pollute our waters, endanger marine life, block navigational routes, and pose real safety risk to workers, first responders, and entire communities, and affect tourism. Conservatives believe in protecting Canadians' waterways and conserving our marine environment. We believe government has a responsibility to ensure that the rules meant to protect our oceans and lakes are actually enforced. And when vessels operate in Canadian waters, whether they are local, commercial, or foreign, they must meet strong standards that keep Canadians safe and protect the environment. Leaving abandoned vessels to rot and pollute our coasts and beautiful lakes is not an option. We've seen this over and over again in my riding and in the Okanagan Valley. Vessels have sunk at docks, leaked fuel into water, or have sat for years because no one could determine ownership or responsibility. In many cases, communities are left to manage the environmental and safety risks of these vessels without the resources or authority to act. For small communities, whether coastal or lakefront, the cost is overwhelming. They are often forced to choose between letting a vessel sit and pollute or diverting scarce funds away from housing, infrastructure, or essential services just to deal with a problem that should never have existed in the first place. And yet, Mr. Speaker, after nearly a decade in government, the Liberal response has been more spending, more bureaucracy, and very little to show for it. An example can be seen through the Oceans Protection Plan, where over $300 million has been allocated to deal with abandoned and derelict vessels. Since 2016, that spending has resulted in the removal of just 791 vessels. That is an average cost of more than $379,000 per vessel. Meanwhile, 1,355 derelict vessels remain on the Canadian Coast Guard's inventory list. At this pace, taxpayers could be forced to spend more than $500 million just to clear the existing backlog. That is not value for money, it's not effective environmental policy, and is certainly not responsible stewardship of public funds. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is not a lack of legislation. The problem is a lack of enforcement, coordination, and accountability. During testimony before the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, witnesses, including government officials, made it clear that federal departments are not working effectively together. Even basic functions, such as managing private buoy regulations, have fallen through the cracks after being transferred between departments. These bureaucratic breakdowns delay assessments, slow removals, and leave communities waiting year after year for actions that never come. Municipalities want action, including municipalities in my riding that have been asking for this for years, while Ottawa continues to get in the way of being a partner. Another major failure is the vessel registration system itself. Without reliable ownership records, enforcement is impossible. Vessels are sold, resold again, often without ownership transfers being properly reported. When a vessel becomes abandoned or hazardous, officials cannot identify who is responsible, and the polluter does not pay, the taxpayer does. The problem is Bill C-244 attempts to address that issue but does not fix that root cause. Clause 3 proposes to prohibit the transfer of ownership if the seller knows or is reckless as to whether, if the seller knows that the buyer is reckless or lacks the ability, resources, or intent to maintain the vessel properly. And that's impossible. That would be impossible to know. While the intention may be to prevent pollution, the language is vague and raises serious concerns. How is a seller expected to determine a buyer's intent or financial capability? Are sellers supposed to demand financial statements, conduct interviews, or predict future behavior? What happens in online auctions, which are increasingly common? What about cross-border sales? How long does the liability follow the seller after the sale has occurred? These unanswered questions create legal uncertainty and risk punishing Canadians who are acting in good faith. Instead of clarity, this amendment risks adding confusion, litigation, and unintended consequences, especially when existing regulations are already not being enforced. Unfortunately, Canadians are now abandoning vessels simply because they can't afford repairs, moorage, or disposal. Even more troubling, many Canadians are being forced to live aboard old, unsafe boats because they have nowhere else to go. We've seen this constantly in Okanagan Lake and throughout the interior. Vessels are being used now as makeshift housing, boats that were never designed to be lived in. Many lack proper sanitation or waste disposal, creating serious risks of pollution. Others pose fire hazards, safety risks, and concerns related to criminal activity. A housing crisis has now spilled into our waterways, turning a social crisis into an environmental one. That is not compassionate policy. That is a result of years of federal mismanagement. Conservatives believe in caring for our waters and the people who depend on them. That means ensuring the polluter pays principle can actually be enforced. It means fixing the vessel registration system so ownership is clear and accountability is real. It means coordinating across federal, provincial, municipal, and First Nations governments instead of burying communities in red tape. I'm looking forward to amendments that will come forward concerning this bill because the issue is extremely important. Conservatives are ready to work towards practical, accountable, and results-driven solutions, and the ones that will truly protect our coasts, our lakes, and our environments for generations to come. Thank you.
Resuming debate. I will invite the honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country to take the floor for his right of reply for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do. Before I begin, I want to recognize the profound loss being felt by the community of Tumbler Ridge. All members of this House grieve with the families who are mourning. We stand with the students, staff, and first responders that are carrying the weight of this unimaginable tragedy. In times like these, we're reminded that in sorrow, we're united as a nation. Canada will hold you in our hearts, not just today, the years to come, but always. But I want to thank all of the members who have participated in this debate on Bill C-244, the Clean Coast Act, for their local leadership and for sharing the all too familiar stories that I'm hearing in my riding as well. This bill is grounded in a simple principle. Canada's marine environment is not a dumping ground, and coastal communities should not be left carrying the cost of pollutions that others create. Coastal regions across the country, residents see impacts firsthand. Abandoned and derelict vessels leaking fuel into harbors, marine infrastructure left to decay, spreading plastic pollution and releasing toxins into sensitive ecosystems. And these are not abstract concerns. They affect navigation safety, local economies, Indigenous food security, and the health of our oceans and waterways. And Bill C-244 proposes 2 practical solutions to address these problems. First, it amends the Canadian Environmental Protection Act to clarify that marine dumping is a strict liability offence. Because of how this legislation has been interpreted to date, liability is limited to cases where the prosecution can prove that this dumping was intentional, and that leaves a troubling loophole where pollution for reckless or negligent behavior goes unaddressed, and the Clean Coast Act addresses this gap. Second, the bill strengthens the Wrecked, Abandoned, and Hazardous Vessels Act by addressing a well-known tactic. Too often, owners avoid their disposal responsibilities by transferring an end-of-life vessel, typically for a nominal amount, to someone that they know cannot dispose of it properly. That is how vessels become hazards in our waterways, and some members have raised fair and important questions about how these measures would work in practice, and I would like to respond directly to those. One question has been about seller liability. Let me be clear, this bill is not about punishing good faith sellers or ordinary Canadians making responsible transactions. The intent is narrow. Liability rises only where a vessel is transferred knowingly or recklessly to someone who lacks the ability or intention to manage it responsibly. Related to that is the question of how a seller can assess whether a buyer is fit. And this bill does not require intrusive measures like interviews, credit checks, or financial investigations. It requires reasonable care, not a guarantee of the future behavior of an owner. The objective is to create clear, practical expectations that are not onerous for good faith sellers while discouraging bad faith transfers to avoid disposal costs. And I just want to recognize these were questions that came up from the member from Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, and the member for Similkameen, South Okanagan, West Kootenay. Members have also raised questions about enforcement and ownership tracking. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, we have good news since this debate started. Transport Canada has announced a modernization of the pleasure craft licensing system by introducing a 5-year license validity, a nominal fee for applications and renewals, and a requirement for owners to update their contact information within 30 days. However, the responsibility to report these transfers remains with the buyer, and this has been a vulnerability that's been addressed by a number of measures, including the member for Kamloops, Shuswap, Central Rockies, that needs to be addressed. And while these licensing changes are a step forward, we need to make sure that there's sustainable long-term resources to deal with abandoned and derelict vessels where we cannot identify the owner. And for that, we need the long-awaited vessel remediation fund, which will be a small user fee that can finance the removal and proper disposal of abandoned and sunken vessels. And I just want to note that the member for Courtenay Alberni brought this up as a need. I look forward to working with him. Et aussi le membre de Pierre Boucher.
Also, the member for Pierre Boucher Les Patriotes also is right to say that these vessels should never be in these spaces for 5 years or more.
By the member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley about the wording of the new strict liability offense. Just want to confirm that this will not affect people that would observe marine dumping. This is only for those that would lead to that by their acts or omissions. Mr. Speaker, I would just say that this legislation, all legislation improves through study. If this legislation proceeds to committee, members will have the opportunity to hear from experts, examine the provisions carefully, and propose amendments as they see fit, including if there are any measures that are necessary to clarify some of the measures in this act. So with that, I know this is a problem that all members know exists, and I urge all members to support this legislation to get to the next stage at committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is as follows. Mr. Weiler, seconded by Mr. Morrissey, moved that Bill C-244, an act to amend the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 1999 and the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. If a member participating in person wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or if a member of a recognized party participating in person wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. If so, the honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, East Sky.
Request a recorded division.
Pursuant to Standing Order 93, the division stands deferred until Wednesday, February 25th, 2026, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. And before we adjourn, I'll just wish everyone a very happy Valentine's Day and a happy Family Day next week as we return to our ridings to serve our constituents. It being 1:40 p.m., the House stands adjourned until Monday, February 23rd, 2026 at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1.